hanging on long enough to know his tribe was in good hands. Everyone stayed quiet, thinking intently. So what do we do? Atali finally asked aloud the question they were all thinking. Astrid spoke up this time. Wait for him to come around. Hope nothing comes our way before then. Get what information we can from the other outcasts. Hiccup nodded in agreement. That's probably our best bet, yeah. Zephyr didn't have to look up to know that a room full of eyes slowly made their way her direction. She sighed, more out of sadness than any other emotion. I'll do my best. Chapter 19, Finding Some Healing. Notes. ****TW, trauma, graphic descriptions of physical violence / murder, retelling / reliving of traumatic events, mentions of suicidal thoughts ****. Chapter text. As soon as she finished her breakfast, Zephyr made her way up to her secret hideaway. Well, sort of secret. No, the whole village hadn't discovered it. Last she knew only one other person knew it existed outside of herself. But she was sharing it a lot these days. And that was putting it lightly. Ethan needed a place to escape. And that was fine. In fact, Zephyr was more than happy to show him her space, really. The problem was when he didn't leave. Zephyr wasn't sure whether it was the fact that her special hideaway was always occupied by someone other than her nowadays that bothered her more, or the fact that Ethan used it to completely avoid his tribe. A tribe that was struggling just as much as he was with the new living arrangements. Worse than that, since he wouldn't leave, he wasn't attending any of the meetings meant to help his tribe. Which was a problem, because no one else really seemed to know what happened except for Ethan. Because, as they quickly learned, the only reason the surviving outcasts survived was because they were pulled from the village by the sailing apprentices before the worst of the fighting had found them. And even the sailing apprentices were too busy getting people to the ship to really get any good idea of what was happening or what the raiding tribe wanted. Every single outcast that made it off the island had been at the ship at the time Alvin was killed, based on what one of the outcasts said. But even he wasn't able to provide a lot of details, because he was apparently too focused on convincing Ethan to get back to the ship at the time. But Ethan wasn't ready to talk still. Zephyr was trying to be patient with him. Everyone in the council was trying to be patient with him. But they could only be patient for so long before they risked putting not only the outcasts, but the Burkians and Wing Maidens in danger. And potentially the Berserkers as well, since they had no idea what to tell them. They only knew what happened on Wing Maiden Island. Which is important, sure. But that knowledge had far too many holes. And knowing the importance of the information regarding the outcast attack, it seemed silly to send a letter with only half of the information, possibly less, especially when they knew the someone that could give them all of the rest of said information was on the damn island. If only he would talk to them. And Zephyr did not want to be the one to go talk to him, because she knew she didn't do delicate situations well. But all of council decided she was the only one he really trusted, which she was convinced was a lie. Certain members of council just loved shoving the two of them together every chance they had, and since she was also the only one who knew where he was, she didn't have much wiggle room to argue. That, and she really didn't want anyone else to know where her spot was. So she was a little stuck. And deeply regretting many of her decisions of the past few days. Okay, well, maybe just the one. Telling Ethan about her spot. Okay. Well. Maybe that was a little harsh. She was glad she could give him a safe space. And, yes, a lot of those feelings are probably more out of frustration than anything else because there's nothing she could do at the moment. But. Still. And of course, once she pushed back the curtain of vines, she found Ethan sitting back in the corner of the cove. She took a deep breath. Here we go. Hey, Ethan, she started. He didn't seem to hear her. Or just decided he didn't hear her. How are you doing? She asked after a beat of silence. Still no answer. Good. Good start. She sighed. This had been a common occurrence the last few days. He seemed to be slipping deeper and deeper into his mind, and it wasn't a good thing. She couldn't blame him, of course. She assumed that what he had experienced must have been terrible. But that was the problem. She assumed. Because he wouldn't talk about it. Actually, he wouldn't talk about anything. And for some reason, Council decided Zephyr would be the perfect person to break him out of his slump. She wasn't happy about that. What in the gods' names was she supposed to do? And yet, every time she came to the hideaway, every time she saw Ethan in the state that he was in, every time she noted that he was obviously slipping deeper and deeper into himself, it broke her heart, and it extinguished any anger or frustration directed at him that had built up while she was away from him. She wasn't heartless, all right. She quietly sighed to herself and stepped into the cove. Over the last week, she had grown more comfortable being in his presence, even if he wasn't very present, so to speak. She sat down next to him, pulled out her journal and charcoal, and continued another one of her many, many sketches. She had found that if she quietly sat with him for a bit before she started talking, he was more inclined to participate in the conversation. So that's just what she did. She quietly sketched while sitting directly next to him, close enough that her left arm brushed up against him every time she drew another stroke. She continued to simply exist in the space with him until she noticed him slowly relax, and eventually even sneak glances at what she was sketching. But she couldn't help noticing it took him a little longer today than it had before. Once he seemed relaxed enough, she quietly stated, "Everyone noticed you didn't go back to the guest quarters last night." He stiffened a little. "Still too soon, then?" She softened her voice, still keeping her eyes on her sketch as she continued to draw. "It's okay, they're not mad. They're just worried." He didn't relax, but he didn't stiffen anymore either. He also didn't have much to say. At least he didn't turn his back to her like he did a few days ago. So she carefully continued on, still sketching. "You didn't make it back for dinner last night, either." If she wasn't paying extra attention to his body language, she would have mistaken him for the rock he was leaning against. "Or lunch?" "Nothing. Or breakfast, actually." She bit her lip, her left hand faltering from her sketch. "I'm really worried about you, Ethan." And still nothing. A little annoyed that her falter left a stray mark on her sketch, she slowly closed the journal in her lap and scrutinized the leather binding. "Are you going to stay silent the whole time I'm here?" she quietly asked. He wasn't even able to answer that question. Zephyr tried not to let her worry seep into her tone, but she couldn't help it anymore. This was the worst she'd seen him yet. She couldn't help sighing with closed eyes before turning her head to look at him. "Ethan, it's been over a week," she began. Her voice was soft, but it wasn't intentional anymore. She just wasn't physically able to make it louder now. "And you leave this cove less and less every day. I don't think I've seen you even try to eat in the last 3 days. I haven't even heard you talk in a day or two. You didn't say a word to me yesterday, remember that? I sat in here for, what, 4 hours with you. And you didn't say a word." She was near tears now, almost begging him to show her some small sign of life at the very least. But he just sat there, staring at the ground, unmoving, barely breathing, barely alive. She couldn't help it anymore. She was able to hold herself together until after she left him yesterday, but she didn't have the energy anymore today. She just let the tears fall, a small part of her almost hoping that they would at least guilt him into some kind of reaction. But it didn't. She bit her lip. "You didn't even react when I walked in today. You didn't even acknowledge that you noticed me. If he reacted at all, it was small enough she didn't notice it." Which, honestly, is hard to believe. She was so desperate to see anything that she was sure she would have. "I'm not mad at you, I just..." She had to look away from him for a moment before she was able to continue. "I'm just scared that we're going to lose you forever." She squeezed her eyes shut, hearing her next words in her head and not wanting to say them but also not able to stop herself from saying them. "That I'm going to lose you forever." His eyes flickered ever so slightly in her direction, which just made her more desperate for him to say something to her. "Ethan, please. You can't just stay up here forever, you can't just avoid the tribe forever." "Sure I can," he muttered, his voice scratchy and deep from neglect. Zephyr's heart raced. Finally, some response. They need you. You know what I heard some of them say. They were half joking about running towards the cliffs and just jumping. Just letting the sea decide their fate. Half joking because the other half of them meant it. Maybe they have a point. Zephyr crumbled. No, you have to show them they still have a life to live. As quick as it came, the energy left him. He sunk deeper into the rock and completely deflated, muttering, "No, there's not." The utter disappointment and desperation for the Ethan she thought she knew that washed over Zephyr overwhelmed her. She fell back against the rock herself, trying to think of something else to say. But she was too overwhelmed with wave after wave of hopelessness. She knew he was still in there somehow, but at this point it was like he was refusing to let himself move on. And she had been so overwhelmed with emotions lately that she felt as if she was feeling everything for both of them. And it finally, apparently, just got to be too much for her, too. She shoved her journal back in her bag as angry tears poured down her cheeks and swiftly stood, moving to leave. "You have a tribe down there waiting for you. You can't just leave them, no matter how much you might want to." Her tone was as harsh as the words she said, but she couldn't bite them back. The only thing that softened the blow of them may have been the desperate cracks that broke through her voice. What in the name of hell is that supposed to mean? She looked back to find he had lifted his head, but still was not looking at her. "It means that no matter how long you sit up here and sulk, you still have duties to attend to, and they aren't going to go away just because you decided you don't want to deal with them." Now he snapped his head in her direction. "Sulk? Sulk? You think I'm sulking? Oh sure, now he wants to show some fight. Tell me one thing you've done since you got to this damn island to try to rise above what you went through. Are you serious, Zephyr? It was a lot to go through." "Oh, really? We wouldn't know. You won't tell anybody? You think it's that easy to just fucking tell people what happened?" "No, I don't, but at least you'd be trying." "You're ridiculous, you know that." Zephyr laughed. "Ridiculous, huh? At least I make an attempt to take care of my tribe." "Gods, would you fuck off already?" "No, I won't fuck off already. If you won't do your fucking duty, then someone has to." "I didn't fucking ask for that duty, you know." "Neither did I. Neither did any of us. But you're going to have to get over it at some point." "I'm not you, Zephyr, I'm not built for this." "Neither. I never said you had to be me. I never said you had to be anyone but you. But goddamn, Ethan, just try to be someone." They were both standing now, breathing heavy, fully facing and glaring at each other. Zephyr cried out in frustrated rage and turned to leave again, stomping her way to the curtain of vines. Damn it. What did Hiccup do, then, huh? When he watched his dad die? If I'm so wrong, then what did he do? Zephyr had never spun on her heels so fast. She could feel her blood boiling over at the sound of her father's name spit back at her in such a confidently accusatory tone, as if he thought that was the point that was going to win this argument for him. What did Hiccup do? What did Hiccup Haddock, my father, do when he watched his father die? He built a pyre on a random boat left behind from the enemy that killed his father, put Stoic's body on it, lit the damn thing and said a few words. And then he shook his ass off and put his friends on some bloody goddamned infant dragons, flew back to his island, stole back his best friend from the same man that ordered said best friend to kill his father, and saved his fucking tribe. He accepted his chiefly oaths hours after his father's damn death because he knew his tribe was in danger, and they needed a leader to survive. She paused only because she realized she was out of breath and almost sobbing to the point that her chest just wasn't pushing out the words anymore. So she set her jaw and tried to regain her composure, only now realizing just how far she had let herself go. Deep down she felt like she didn't have the right to be so upset with him, but she just couldn't help it anymore. She had tried. She had tried so damn hard for over a week now. What else was she supposed to do? Still shaking but feeling a little more in control, she quoted his words right back at him, "I'm not your enemy." Sound familiar? He didn't answer, but his eyes remained locked on her. "I'm not your damn enemy, Ethan. I just want to help you. All of us just want to fucking help you." She paused a moment, waiting for him to fight back. But when he didn't, she scrubbed the tears furiously off her face and climbed back down to the ground. Now, normally, when she felt like this, she would, go to her spot. But somebody was already there. And she sure as shit couldn't join him there, because he's the one that made her feel like this in the first place. She cried out and kicked a bit of brush by her feet. Damn it. Damn it. Her body moved on autopilot while her brain ran rampant, which wasn't a good thing, because her body seemed to remember that she was supposed to meet with her mother back home after talking to Ethan. Her mind, however, was still back in the hideaway cove as she stormed into the house, slamming the door behind her. Astrid jumped. Zephyr, come on, I just fixed those hinges after nothing bent them last night. Why is he like that? Zephyr exploded, proceeding to storm around the first story of the home. Astrid raised her eyebrows. Honey, if I could explain your brother's destructive habits, I wouldn't have so many gray hairs by now. Mom. All right, calm down. She dropped what she was doing and carefully sat in her favorite chair in the fireplace room, leaning back with a sigh and rubbing her belly. I'm going to guess it didn't go well with Ethan, then. He just sits there, Mom. It's like he pretends that I'm not even there. He just ignores everything he should be doing. Astrid nodded. He's been through a lot. Zephyr laughed sarcastically. Oh, don't I know? He didn't say much, but he made absolutely sure to remind me of that. You disagree? No, I don't. I know he's been through a lot. But goddamn, Mom, what am I supposed to do? What is anyone supposed to do? He won't let us help. He just sits up there all alone and doesn't let anyone help him. He doesn't even try anymore. Tears were flowing freely down Zephyr's face now. I can't see any of the old him in there anymore. He's gone, it's not there. He's just so empty now, and I want him back so damn much, Mom. But I can't even find him in there anymore. She reached out her hands as if the words she needed were in front of her, but they remained empty. Just like Ethan did. Zephyr sobbed and let her arms fall limp. I don't know how to fix him, Mom. I don't. I just want him back. She looked at her mother. She begged to her, How did you fix Dad? All those times, how did you fix him? Astrid watched her with sad eyes. You can't fix him, baby. It doesn't work like that. Zephyr's head dropped. She tried to hold back more sobs. Come here, Astrid whispered, holding out her arm. Zephyr hesitated a moment before giving in, sitting next to her mom and leaning against her. Astrid squeezed her gently to her side and kissed her hair. You can't fix him, baby, she repeated. You can't just force those kinds of ideas into their heads. You just have to, she sighed. All you can do is lead them there, and then give them the chance to accept it all. Zephyr sniffed. I just want him back, she whispered. I know you do, baby. Suddenly, the front door slammed open again. Zephyr quickly swiped at her eyes and stood, but she wasn't sure why. Astrid started to say something else about the hinges. But both of them fell silent when Ethan burst into the room, breathing heavily with bright red eyes. He found Zephyr standing in the middle of the room as he turned the corner. She blinked and shook off her surprise. She spluttered out in surprise, Ethan. Shut up and let me talk. She blinked and raised her eyebrows. Excuse me. No, you had your chance to tell me off. Now it's my turn to talk. Zephyr crossed her arms over her chest and popped out her hip. Fine. Then talk. I'm just going to step on out of here, Astrid said, standing up and making her way out of the room. As she stepped past Ethan, she added lightly, nice to see you up and about, by the way, and disappeared around the corner. Zephyr rolled her eyes before turning her attention back to Ethan. Well, she prompted, a little impatiently. He looked her up and down for a moment, and Zephyr opened her mouth to say something anyway when he finally spoke up. No, you don't get to be mad at me. He yelled, breathing heaving between phrases as if building the strength to continue. You don't get to tell me how I'm supposed to feel, or what I'm supposed to do. You didn't see what I saw, and even if you did, I'm not you. I'm not Hiccup, I'm not Astrid, I'm not my dad, I'm not Dager, I'm not Atali, I'm not strong like you guys. My dad sheltered me my whole life, he protected me at all times, and he never told me, but I'm pretty damn sure it was to make up for not being able to protect my mom. His words were choked through sobs now, and Zephyr wasn't able to keep her angered stance. But she just listened as he pushed on. He died protecting me. He. You want to know what happened? You know to know what happened so fucking bad. I watched two guys kick out his knees and hold him to the fucking ground, Zephyr. And he just let it happen. He just sat there and watched while this madman walked up to him and threatened him and tried to pry out information that Dad wasn't going to give. My dad teased this fucking bastard so he wouldn't lose interest. And just when he was about to anyway, my dad spit on his boots and said, "Try me, Scrager Sangsarin." Zephyr was instantly nauseous. Yes, it was an older term, but Alvin was an older man. He knew the implications. As one of the highest insults, he was essentially giving this madman permission to murder him with no chance of retaliation towards him according to unspoken Norse law. And Ethan knew that too. He knew what he was doing. He stormed on. He knew exactly what he was doing. He did it to buy me a few extra minutes, to give me a little extra time to escape. And I didn't fucking take advantage of it. I just sat there. He rushed her suddenly, and she took a weak step backwards out of instinct, but he stopped a few arms lengths in front of her and gestured to the empty space between them. He was this close to Dad. This close. And he shot a damn arrow through my father's heart. With him standing closer to her, she could see the glazed over look in his eyes. He wasn't in this room anymore. He was back on the island. He was reliving every moment from that night. But Zephyr didn't do anything to stop it. She couldn't, no matter how much she wanted to. He needed to get this off his chest. So she just cried there with him and let him go. He laughed sarcastically as a bit of insanity seeped into his eyes. But that wasn't enough, apparently. Because he took out his sword and lobbed his damn head off in one fluid motion. Just sliced it right off, like it was nothing. I heard it. I heard my father's head hit the ground. I. Zephyr watched him as he crumbled from the inside out. His shoulders hunched, and when he tried to stand his ground, they hunched more. His knees wobbled, his fingers and arms curled in towards his chest. He bent over at his waist until his knees gave out entirely and hit the ground. Zephyr didn't even bother trying to process everything he just said. That wasn't important right now. It would be, later on, much later on. But not right now. She lowered herself in front of him, slowly and quietly as if she was afraid of scaring him away. She cupped his face in her hands and leaned in close. You are stronger than you give yourself credit for, do you understand me? I get that you don't feel like you are. But I know you are, and you know why. Because you're here, damn it, you made it out of there with as much of the tribe as you could and you got them to safety, despite what you saw. And I don't know many Vikings that would manage to pull that off. He's gone, Zeph, Ethan croaked through another sob. I know. It's gonna be okay. You're not alone, okay? You will never be alone, do you hear me? I will always be here for you. Always. She had no idea what else to say to him, and after thinking over some words that just didn't sound right, she decided not to say anything at all. So instead she wrapped her arms around his shoulders, guided his head to her shoulder, and held him. They sat like that for a while, with Ethan sobbing into her shoulder and Zephyr helplessly holding him tightly against her. She felt like she should be doing more, but she just didn't know what to do. Nothing else felt right. Not that this felt perfect, either, but it was better than just staring at him while he mourned his father. It may have been an hour, it may have been several, but eventually he calmed down enough that Zephyr was able to move him up off the floor and at least into one of the long seats in the room. She debated stepping into the kitchen for a moment to get him something to eat, but the thought of leaving him in the room alone worried her. And then some of the words he said in the hideaway floated back to her, how letting the sea decide their fate didn't sound like a bad idea, and that there was no longer a life to live. And she had to admit that the implications of his words just hadn't broken through at the time. She had been so distracted by the fact that he responded that she didn't comprehend what his responses meant. But once she did. So she sat beside him again, despite the fact that his sobs had mostly reduced to sniffles. She wrapped her arms around him and let him rest his head on her shoulders again. She found herself running her fingers through his hair and tracing the lines of his muscles down his arm, more for herself than for him, but once she started doing it she really couldn't convince herself to stop. Normally, she didn't like sitting down for too long, especially during the day. There were always things to attend to, so there was no time to sit around. But as Ethan's sobs disappeared completely, and even his sniffles became few and far between, she found herself extremely comfortable. The steady rising and falling of his chest grew deeper and deeper until she was certain he was asleep. She peeked down at him. For the first time in weeks, he seemed relaxed. He would occasionally wince or whimper from a fitful dream, so Zephyr would shush him and hold him tighter and tell him he was okay until it passed. Eventually she realized it had been a while since his dreams had broken the steady rhythm of his breathing. Her own breaths had slowed to match his without her realizing. She opened her eyes, not remembering when she closed them. But her head was just so heavy. And he was just so warm. And before she knew it, she found her head was resting on his, and her eyes just wouldn't stay open anymore. And he hadn't had a bad dream in a while. So she was sure it was fine if she just rested for a minute. Tilda. When Zephyr opened her eyes again, it was dark throughout the house. The fire had been stoked and someone had laid blankets over Ethan and her, but she couldn't hear anyone moving about. She wondered what time it was. Zephyr. Ethan started to stir in her arms. Shush. You're okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. She tried to move her hand to brush through his hair, but she quickly found it was so numb from being squished between Ethan's back and the back of the chair that her fingers didn't obey correctly. The not-so-smooth movement only woke him more. He looked around as if trying to reorient himself to his surroundings. What time is it? He murmured. I'm not sure. She tried to wiggle the numbness out of her fingers. How are you feeling? I'm all right. He looked at her, and then her fingers. Did I? His eyes widened a little as they flicked to her face. I am so sorry, Zephyr, I didn't mean to fall asleep on you. Zephyr giggled, she giggled, what the hell? And brushed through the knots in his hair. It's okay, you needed it. He started to reply, but apparently thought better of his words and simply sat up instead. But he was drowsy still, and he had some trouble. Zephyr straightened up herself and grabbed his arms to keep him steady. Gods, he was so weak. It must have been longer since he last ate than Zephyr thought. Thanks, he muttered. Now that she had a better view of his face, she could see more tears already welling in his eyes. They didn't fall this time, but Zephyr assumed he just didn't have anything left in him to cry. She found herself gently wiping away the moisture in his eyes with her sleeve. He opened his eyes when she pulled her hand away, and she caught herself lost in the deep brown staring back at her. He wasn't anywhere near okay yet, but she could at least see a flicker, a suggestion of himself in his eyes. It wasn't the same dark void she had seen when he first stepped off the ship, like being dropped in a deep cave where light couldn't find you and the warmth of the sun was entirely absent. It was more like a forest in the middle of the night, on a rare winter night when the air is bitterly cold but snow hasn't quite fallen. When the trees have already shed their leaves to the earth below, and they have already browned to match the color of the soil. When not even the moon illuminates the woods as another cycle comes to a close. But you can distantly feel a thrum of life in the far-off caves and deep in the ground where animals sleep the winter away. He was still cold and distant, but she could sense those subtle hints of life behind his gaze. And she had a fearful hope that spring would come again someday. Thank you, he whispered. She jumped, startled by his voice breaking through her internal ranting, and then chuckled sadly. You probably shouldn't thank me. I could have handled all of that a little better. She couldn't help looking back into his eyes, and her face fell in sympathy. She absent-mindedly reached up to fix the strap holding his hair back. You've been through so much already without me making it worse. She brushed the strands around his face back to where he always had them tied and secured the leather around them again. He watched her face carefully as she did, unfazed by the gesture. As she pulled her hands back, he said, You didn't. She blushed, turning her eyes to the floor. Ethan, you told me that jumping off a cliff didn't sound like a half-bad idea, and I responded by yelling at you. Maybe I needed the kick in the ass. She sighed in frustration. You don't need to justify what I did, it wasn't right. Why are you so hard on yourself? She couldn't help but meet his eyes. Why are you? She asked quietly. He didn't say anything. He searched her eyes instead, and she did the same to him. They both seemed lost in a trance as they stared at each other. And for once, Zephyr wasn't afraid of what he might see if she let him peer into her soul for too long. For the first time in her life, she was comfortable letting someone see her that way. Whether that was a good thing or not, she wasn't sure. But she kind of liked the way it felt, being able to trust someone that much. And as she searched his eyes, she thought she could see the same comfort and resolve in him as well. The same trust, the same curiosity, even beneath the pain and suffering that he obviously experienced. And, unless she was mistaken, maybe she could even see a bit of healing beginning to blossom. The corner of his mouth twitched up ever so slightly in amusement, but it was enough to break Zephyr from her trance. She blushed and looked away, brushing loose strands of her hair behind her ear. You should really eat. Are you hungry at all? Yeah, maybe a little, he said quietly, and when she peeked back at him, she saw a small smile gracing his lips. Her heart fluttered unexpectedly. It was the first time she'd seen him smile since her birthday. She nodded and stood, though apparently she moved too quickly. She had to concentrate to regain her balance. Well, why don't you stay there and, get comfortable, okay? I'll go fix something for us. I can help, if you'd like, he offered. Zephyr blushed brighter. Oh, no, that's okay. I got it, really. I also need a minute away from you to process whatever in hell's name just happened. He chuckled. All right. She nodded. All right, she repeated for no reason whatsoever and stepped quite clumsily out the room. She quickly started down the hallway to the food storage, tripping on many different things in the process. Once she was out of sight, she shook her head at herself and rubbed her temple. Gods, what had gotten into her? She stepped into the storage space and glanced around. She knew they probably had some bread, and she made yak butter the day before that she could spread on it with some honey. And maybe some of the berries she found yesterday morning, that should work for now. Then again, depending on how late it was, she should be able to find some leftover stew. Good morning. Zephyr jumped out of her skin and spun around. She found her father standing on the other side of the small room, smirking and munching on a hazelnut. Her cheeks burned deep red. Thor almighty, Dad, don't scare me like that. He kept smirking, speaking just quietly enough that Ethan wouldn't hear at the front of the house. Have a good nap. She winced. I know, I'm sorry, you must have. Oh, no, I didn't need you today. Everyone settled in, we did just fine. He was enjoying this far too much. Oh. That's good. Oh yes. Besides, you were obviously much more needed here. He tossed another peeled hazelnut into his mouth. Zephyr froze, tried to think of something to say, opened her mouth, realized she had nothing to say, and groaned as she turned to the shelves at her left in search of the bread. Hiccup grew serious. Your mom told me that Ethan opened up to you earlier. Zephyr winced. Did she tell you what he said? For the most part. He was quiet for a second, probably shaking his head. Gods, I can't imagine watching any of that happen. Me either. She found the bread she was looking for and brought it to the table in the center of the room. Are you going to ask him to talk to council? Hiccup shook his head. I'll give him some time first. To really adjust, you know. Not just hide out. We'll see how he's doing in a few days. Zephyr nodded slowly, but didn't have much else to say. Her father swept up the now empty shells of his hazelnuts in his hand and tossed them out of the door leading back to the small garden behind their home. So where's everyone else? She asked, not enjoying the silence. Up at the Great Hall for the evening meal. I was just about to join them, actually. I just had some work to finish first. It wasn't as late as Zephyr thought it was. He peeled the last of his cracked hazelnuts as he headed towards the door. Maybe you should see if your boyfriend wants to tag along, he added. He turned to throw another smirk in her direction and tossed the hazelnut in the air, catching it in his mouth as he disappeared down the hallway. Chapter 20, As the Dust Settles. Notes. I'm back. I'll leave some fic/life updates at the end of the chapter for those interested, but for now, enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Astrid took a deep breath of the chilly evening air as she strolled through the woods. She was headed to the meadows on the island. She wanted to see the flowers. She rested her hand on the very large bump in her belly. The trees began to thin, so she was close. Snow began to fall through the canopy above her. Her feet crunched through the newly fallen snow. She reached a break in the trees. The long grass blew in the wind as snow fell between the blades. Astrid smiled and leaned her head back, closing her eyes. She cradled her belly in both of her hands. Her baby rolled over inside of her, she must be enjoying the fresh air too. Astrid opened her eyes and looked straight ahead again. Zephyr raised up out of the grass in the middle of the meadow. Astrid watched her for a moment, but Zephyr only stared back. The snow fell heavier around them. And then the head of an arrow pierced through the front of Zephyr's chest. A large, black figure shaped like a cloaked man raised out of the grass behind Zephyr. Zephyr didn't move. She stared blankly at Astrid. Astrid felt her blood run cold. She gasped and called out to her daughter. The figure lifted his head and flashed a nasty grin in Astrid's direction. He lifted a sword above his head. He swung it back down to Zephyr's neck. Zephyr, no! Astrid screamed and tried to step towards her. She tripped on something and fell forward. She reached her arms out as she fell, trying to catch herself, trying to save her daughter. Astrid. She felt a hand on her arm and opened her eyes. Astrid, it's okay. She realized she wasn't outside and focused her eyes on the room around her. She was breathing heavily, arms outstretched in front of her as she sat up in her bed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ast, take a deep breath, a gentle voice spoke next to her. A protective arm wrapped around her shoulders and pulled her back. Zephyr's safe, I've got you. She obeyed. She laid her hand on her belly, much smaller than it had been moments ago in her dream, as she leaned back into the safe embrace of her husband. He sat up against the headboard and led her shoulders back against his chest, wrapping his hand around her to hold her belly as well. It was so real. You always did have trouble with that early on in your pregnancies. He kissed her hair and rubbed her arm with his free hand. What happened? She shook her head slowly. I was in that meadow again. Hiccup was quiet for a moment. It was Zephyr this time. You yelled out her name. Astrid nodded. He squeezed her shoulder. Grimmel's gone now, love. He can't hurt us. She bit her lip. It wasn't Grimmel. Then. Who was it? I couldn't tell. Hiccup stayed quiet, and after a moment she slowly whispered, he killed her the way Eason described Alvin's death. Hiccup's hand faltered for a moment. Oh. He said nothing else, but Astrid was okay with that. She hated when he made promises to her that he couldn't keep. Doing it for the tribe was just a part of chiefing sometimes, but they preferred open honesty behind closed doors. This fear, however, was one they shared. It didn't need to be spoken. Neither of them knew what to say, so Hiccup eventually just stated the facts. Zephyr's okay, so are the others. We have patrols from Sunup to Sunup. If someone was going to make their way on the island, we'll know. Astrid just nodded her head. She knew if someone was determined to make their way on the island, they'd find a way. But she was sure Hiccup knew that too. And they really did believe that they would know if anyone attempted to breach the island. But there was always that chance. Astrid took a deep breath of the chilly morning air as she strolled through the woods. Hiccup had been unusually quiet this morning following the discussion of Astrid's dream, though Astrid was admittedly equally as quiet. Especially when Zephyr had walked down the stairs. They had tried to recover quickly, but unfortunately they were sure she noticed. Astrid could tell by Nuffink's suspicious glances that he had noticed something as well. But Zephyr hadn't said anything before grabbing some breakfast and leaving the home. Nuffink hadn't either, as he ate in unusual silence, followed by announcing his intent to find Nutmeg Ingerman. Hiccup had left for the forge as he usually did when he was upset or when something caught him off guard or when he needed to think. Astrid had stayed behind at the house with Spro and Willow. She had tried to focus on chores that needed done, pulling weeds and the last of the viable vegetables from the garden, tidying up and sweeping rooms that didn't need to be swept again, organizing and reorganizing the pantry which she knew would annoy Hiccup later tonight, though that wasn't her intent. She was just restless, folding furs and placing them strategically around the house in her favorite spots so she wouldn't have to get up when she got a cold chill. Getting up was harder and harder these days with the little one starting to obviously show. But around midday she just couldn't keep herself busy in the house, so she had wrapped her furs around her shoulders, bundled up the littlest haddocks, took them up the hill to Valka, and headed out into the woods behind their home alone. She instantly felt a little more settled as the breeze lifted her hair. It felt good despite the chill it sent down her spine, which in turn caused the baby to tremble slightly. She smiled. She wouldn't have noticed such slight movements when she had been pregnant with Zephyr, but being her 5th pregnancy to reach the 4th moon, she knew what she was feeling well. She sighed. If only Stormfly were here to keep her company. She was always a great listener, and she made Astrid feel safe in a way humans just couldn't. Dragons were more simple than humans, more specifically, the humans who liked to kill the fathers of young heirs to chiefdoms. Astrid shook her head. We're not thinking about that right now. She instead decided to focus on the tasks for the day. She wanted to check in with Toughnut and Snotlout, see how Minden was doing, visit with Atali. Nothing that necessarily needed to be done today unfortunately, just busy work. But busy work was good sometimes, when the alternative was sulking around the house. Busy work could be productive. What she wanted to do was train. Throw her axe into a few innocent trees, practice her evasive maneuvers, keep her muscles familiar with the feel of combat. But Hiccup always put his foot down when she was pregnant. No weapons once you start to show. A shiver crept down her spine as she recalled the one caveat he allowed. The first pregnancy he had ever included the phrase, unless you have no choice. She cradled her belly in her hands. Gods, please don't let it come to that. Please don't make me endanger my child like that. Suddenly her heart stopped cold, as if her worst nightmare was coming true. She heard footsteps racing towards her. She dove as gracefully as she could manage into some tall brush nearby, not her best idea, but the best she could do in the current situation. The footsteps were already so loud, the source couldn't be far off. She took a few deep breaths to steady her heart rate, crouched as low to the ground as she could, and steadied her breathing. Stay quiet, don't let them find you. The footsteps began to sound more like the crashing of a startled yak, crushing branches and grass and leaves and everything else in its path as it ran. Whoever it was, they must be large. Which put Astrid at an even worse disadvantage. Were she more agile, she wouldn't be worried, but with the baby. She held her breath as the crashing came closer. They'll reach her any minute now. A large, dark-haired figure burst through the trees as it ran closer, and Astrid knew they would run on the path directly next to her hiding spot. She tried to push herself deeper into the brush, hoping the loud crunching of the person's own footsteps would drown out the sound of her moving. The dark-haired figure approached the brush she hid in. He didn't stop as he ran closer, and suddenly ran right past her. She let out her breath in a gasp of both exasperation and relief. Standing up, she nearly cried out, "Ethan!" What? He stopped in his tracks, but tripped over a root sticking up out of the path as he turned to see who had said his name. He fell backwards and rolled thanks to his momentum, smacking back against a tree. "Oh, gods!" Astrid gasped, running towards him. "Ethan, are you okay? What's going on? What are you running from?" Ethan groaned, pushing himself up. "No, nothing, I was just... I'm fine, it's fine." He rubbed the back of his neck and peered back down the path they had come from, glanced at Astrid, and glanced back down the path. Where did you come from, Chiefess? I didn't even see you." Astrid blushed, considered lying, but figured there wasn't much point to that. It was just Ethan, after all. He never was one to tease. "Well, you were bounding up that path so fast, I thought you were someone that wasn't supposed to be here." She offered her hand to him. He looked confused in the direction of the path. Someone that wasn't. Suddenly the realization was clear on his face. "Oh gods, you thought I was... I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," he stammered, scrambling to his feet. He held his hands up in surrender rather than accepting Astrid's help. "Ethan, it's all right. Are you okay?" She resisted the urge to brush off his clothing like she would with nothing. "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm okay." He blushed and brushed off his clothing himself, shaking his head at the ground. Astrid pursed her lips in concern. "What were you running from?" "No one," he quickly responded, still not looking at her. She considered his words, his frightened and flighty stance, and the red around his eyes that told her he either must have been crying or was about to when she stopped him. He had understood her correctly, she wanted to know if he was running from someone. But now she could see she had misinterpreted him. She tried to look him in the eyes and gently prodded, "I didn't ask who." Ethan's eyes flicked up but didn't quite meet hers. He busied himself with brushing off more dirt. It had been a few days since Zephyr burst into the house ranting about how Ethan wouldn't let anyone help him, about how much she missed him, followed by Ethan bursting into the house demanding she listen to him. But she still clearly remembered the look on his face when he did. She remembered the strange look in his eyes, the desperation and pain in his voice, the weight to his posture. She remembered how much it reminded her of Hiccup so many years ago, weeks after Stoic had died and he had finally given himself a chance to grieve. He was different than Hiccup was back then, but the bones of anguish were still there, the same kind of suffering obviously building off of it. Ethan had that same look on his face now, the same kind of distance in his stare. Astrid didn't know how to help Hiccup back then, she had no experience helping her soulmate mourn the loss of his father. She felt the same helplessness now, she had no experience helping her son mourn the loss of his father and his tribe. But she couldn't just stand by and watch either. She couldn't back then, and she wouldn't right now. "Ethan," she started slowly. She was going to tell him that she knows he experienced some terrible things, that she was here for him if he needed anything, that she cared for him and he could trust her. But he knew those things, it wouldn't help him. So she tried something else instead. "I was just headed to the Great Hall for some food. Would you join me?" She smiled and added, "In case any more large scary Vikings come running through the forest towards me." He smiled sheepishly and waited patiently for Astrid to lead the way. They walked in silence for a time. Ethan seemed lost in his thoughts and Astrid didn't want to disturb that. But once he seemed a bit too distressed for Astrid's liking, she decided to start telling stories about Zephyr's childhood, speaking as if she had been speaking the whole walk. "I don't know if you knew this, but when Nothing was little, he had a hard time learning how to talk. When Zephyr was 7 years old and he was 4, he came home one day really upset, but he went upstairs to his room without saying anything. Zephyr came in right behind him, and when I asked her about it, she said some older boys were making fun of him for the way he talked. I was going to go up and talk to Nothing, but Zephyr stopped me and asked if she could talk to him instead. I let her go, and a few minutes later they were chasing each other down the stairs laughing and smiling and happy as can be. I still don't know what she said to him, but after that his speaking just kept getting better and better." She laughed. "And come to find out, Zephyr, at 7 years old, beat the shit out of this 12-year-old boy that made fun of Nothing." She shook her head, still smiling. "She's always been such a spitfire. Always so smart, she definitely got that from Hiccup. He says she got her strength from me. But even when she was little, she refused to give up on anyone she loved." Chuckling, she added, "And she's only grown more stubborn about it with age." Ethan didn't react much through the story, nor did he really give any indication he was listening to it at all. But that was okay. Astrid was just doing what she could to try to give him some comfort. And since he hadn't seemed annoyed by her storytelling, she didn't stop. "When Zephyr was even younger than that, 3, I believe, there was this late season storm that caught the whole village off guard. It was a pretty bad one too. Bad lightning, loud thunder. Zephyr was with us in the Great Hall, but when it hit one of us had to make sure the village was secured, and one of us had to make sure the house was secured. Since Hiccup has the metal leg, I made him take Zephyr home and I went out to check the village. Boy was he pissed when he found out later that night I was pregnant." Astrid laughed rebelliously. "Anyway, apparently while I was gone, Zephyr had gotten really scared and said she just wanted to be brave like us. Hiccup, being the sweet man he is, told her that he gets scared and mommy gets scared too, and that didn't mean you weren't brave. He told her that even when she was scared, she'd still be his little warrior. And every thunderstorm after that, when she got scared, she'd stand in the middle of the room and stare at the door, and with whatever small play weapon she was obsessed with at the time in hand, she'd yell, "I'm brave. I'm a warrior." Over and over and over again. Hiccup was so proud every time she did it, and she was so proud of herself every time he called her his little warrior. I'd never seen him so happy before. Astrid smiled at the memory of Hiccup's eyes lit up like a bonfire, and a smile big enough to touch the edges of Midgard. So he never stopped. It became the only nickname he ever used for her. He wanted to believe it would give her the confidence she needed growing up as heir, something he never had. "He's a good man," Ethan said. Astrid nodded. "He always has been." She heard Ethan take a breath, but then stop. She gave him time to collect his thoughts. When Ethan didn't speak, she softly offered, "Your father was too. Maybe not at every point in his life, but he made up for it in his later years. He was always loyal to his people. Would have stayed loyal to Burke had it not been for the misunderstanding between him and Stoic." Ethan half smiled and chuckled. Astrid smiled as well. "Let's just say we almost had a repeat of history with Snotlout and Hiccup. That's just Viking nature. But when your father brought his tribal warriors to protect Burke when Stoic was incapacitated, we knew better than ever he was a real ally again. And he stayed true to that, all the way to the end." Ethan slowly nodded. Astrid took a breath. "I know you don't feel like he prepared you properly, but that's not his fault. It's not an easy thing for a parent to do, prepare their child for such a job. For such a life, really. You don't get a break from being chief. And we know how hard that is, how stressful and strenuous it can be. And there's never a right way to do it, no. Every chief was raised and trained differently for the job, and every chief will tell you they didn't feel ready when it was their time to take it, no matter how old or young they were." Alvin took a more gentle approach, because he didn't want to lose you over it like Stoic almost lost Hiccup. She smiled and gently elbowed Ethan. Believe me, no one expected Alvin the treacherous to take the gentle approach. Ethan smiled a bit bigger this time and nodded his head. Astrid somered again. He did his best at an impossible job. That's all any of us are trying to do. Parents can't help but protect their children. Ethan nodded, and seemed to be thinking deeply about something. Astrid let him, as it didn't seem to be too distressing for him yet. After a moment, he said, "Hiccup offered to absorb the remaining outcasts into New Burke." Astrid nodded slowly. "I'm not surprised. He offered the same thing to Atali and the Wing Maidens." Ethan seemed caught off guard by this. "What did Atali say?" "She hasn't given her decision yet. She's not sure what she wants to do. I'm sure you can understand the feeling," she added more pointedly towards him. "So? It wasn't just Hiccup trying to protect me from what happened to him?" Astrid pursed her lips. She knew she had to answer this carefully. "I can't speak for my husband's intentions. I may have been married to him for 16 years, but I can't read his mind yet." Ethan smiled. "But if I had to guess, I'm sure it was a bit of everything. Yes, he obviously sympathizes with you and understands the situation you're in, how difficult it is. But he did also offer Atali the same solution, as would any of us in council for any of our allied tribes. He also understands that both the outcasts and Wing Maidens wouldn't be safe returning to their respective islands, not now and possibly not ever again. Now, the difference between your tribe and Atali's is that the Wing Maidens didn't suffer any casualties. Unfortunately, your tribe seemed to have suffered both your portion and theirs." Ethan winced. "Shit. That isn't your fault, Ethan. The Wing Maidens were immensely lucky because Toothless and some Light Furies came to their aid. They would have suffered the loss of many lives if they hadn't." "Toothless?" Ethan asked. Astrid nodded. "We're not sure where they came from, but Atali and all the Wing Maidens said they were there and led them in the direction of our island before heading back to the hidden world. We assume, at least, they took the infant razor whips with them." Ethan nodded slowly as he took in this new information. As they neared a break in the trees near the Great Hall's front entrance, another thought occurred to Astrid that she wanted to make clear before they entered a public space. She reached out and grabbed his arm. "Ethan, I need you to understand something." "Yes," Hiccup offered what he did for political and practical reasons. "But that doesn't negate the fact that he and I care deeply for you, as we always have. You and Alvin have been and will always be family to us, just like Dager, Mala, Atali, and Heather. Whatever decision you make, we will support you and do whatever we can to help you. Please don't be afraid to come to us for help or advice or—" "Thank you," Chiefess Eason said. If it weren't for the genuine smile, she would have thought he only said it to make her stop talking. She smiled. "Astrid, please. I'm sure Hiccup has told you many times we are past those formalities." "Yes, Chiefess," he said with a smile and a smirk. "Humor. Good." Astrid shook her head while still smiling and waved him ahead of her. But as he opened the door for her, the sound of arguing spilled out of the hall. "What in the name of hell?" Astrid pushed past Eason to find a group of unruly Burkians practically up in arms against some young outcast boys standing in front of a group of their elders as if protecting them. One Burkian had his hands locked around the wrists of a young outcast. She felt her blood boil. Eason pushed past her with a hand on her shoulder. "Hey," he yelled as he stormed across the hall. He grabbed the Burkian by the shoulders and helped the outcast boy throw him off. "What is going on here?" He looked directly at the Burkian he had thrown. "They are stealing," the man yelled. "What exactly did they steal?" Eason spit back. "They are taking food," another Burkian said. "Oh, this food." Eason pointed angrily to the large cauldron next to them, his face redder than the flames beneath it. "The communal meal. The one for everyone. Is that it?" "It's for our tribe," the first man defended. "They are not part of us. I don't give a damn what tribe they are part of." Eason spit. He stepped closer to the man, making it evident how much taller he was than the Burkian. "How dare you keep injured and sick elders from eating? They have been through enough as it is, you don't know what they've seen." The first Burkian scoffed. "They are not the first ones to see war. Then as a fellow warrior, I'd expect a bit more compassion from you. Chief Haddock, your chief, offered us sanctuary of food and shelter and protection, so that cauldron is just as much theirs as it is yours. Or should I alert the chief that his tribe suddenly finds issue with his orders?" By now, Eason was close enough that he had to peer down to see the Burkian's face. "Next time you have a problem with my tribe, you come to me first. And next time you have a problem with Chief Haddock's orders and decide to take your own form of justice, you better hope I find you before he does." Eason stood his ground until the Burkian began to falter and eventually move back towards his seat. As he turned, though, he met Astrid's eyes. His face drained of color. "I'd give Chief Eason a bit more respect if I were you," she threatened. His eyes widened a bit more at the title of chief and he proceeded to sit back down at his own bowl of stew without a word or another look in the outcast's direction. Eason continued to glare at the man as he started to turn back to the outcasts. "Everyone okay?" he quietly asked. They all nodded, the elders obviously frightened. "It's okay, get some food. I'll wait here until you're done. They won't bother you anymore." They seemed at least a little comforted by this, enough so that they found the courage to gather up their bowls again and spoon themselves out some stew. Once they did, Eason looked to the outcast boy who had fought the Burkian. He was wringing his hands around his wrists. "You all right there, Harva?" Harva nodded, still watching the Burkian across the room. "Tough Nut might have something to help that. Go see him, I'll keep watch here." Harva met Eason's eyes quickly before looking back at the Burkian. He must have been satisfied, because he nodded to Eason again before slowly leaving the hall. Astrid walked up to Eason. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine," he said quietly. "Sorry about that." "Don't apologize." She matched his tone, not keen on letting the Burkian mob hear them. "You did great. But if you're okay here, then I want to tell Hiccup what happened before it becomes an issue again, okay?" "I'm alright," Eason assured her. "I just want to stay and make sure they get their fill." Astrid nodded and smiled supportively. "Come find me or send someone if you need anything." As soon as Eason nodded in agreement, she turned on her heels and stalked out the door. These unruled Burkians were getting to be too much of an issue lately. Astrid took a deep, long, tired sigh. After leaving Hiccup a furious mess over the Burkian outcast fight earlier, she wasn't sure if she was ready for the discussion she planned to have with Atali tonight. But, whether she was ready or not, she knew it needed to be done. They had both pushed it off for so long now, and the wing maidens were beginning to grow restless not knowing their own fates. And so Astrid all too quickly found herself sitting with Atali in front of the fire in Atali's temporary home, one of a few that had become vacant over the last few years and hadn't found new occupants due to the unusually small size, sipping a nausea-combating tea. "Rough day?" Atali asked. Astrid scoffed. "Sometimes I think I expect too much of our tribe." "I know what you mean," Atali agreed, taking a large swig of ale. Astrid hadn't known Atali to drink until recently. Which also meant Astrid needed to get this conversation done while Atali was still sober. "All right, neither of us are good at small talk, so let's dive right into it. Where is your head at with your tribe? Have you thought about our offer anymore?" Atali sighed. "I had a feeling you were going to do that. It needs to be done, Atali. A decision has to be made. If not for your sake, then for your women." I know, you don't have to lecture me, Astrid." Atali took another big swig. Astrid silently wondered how many pints she had before she got here. So she tried a kinder approach. "I know it's not an easy decision to make, Atali. We're just trying to help. And to help you be realistic. I don't think I have much of a choice, do I, Astrid? We don't have a home, our island has been reduced to ashes. We have nowhere else to go." Atali sunk deep into her chair. "We can never go back to the way we were. Our razor whips are gone. Our island is gone. Our culture is gone. We have nothing." Astrid nodded before quietly and gently teasing, "How long have you been holding that in?" Atali glared at her over her pint. Astrid sighed. "I'm not trying to be an ass. I just want to help." "You can help by getting me another drink," Atali said half sarcastically. Astrid rolled her eyes, but when she saw Atali's drink was nearly gone, she figured she'd need another one. After all, this was unfortunately the most she'd gotten Atali to say since the shock wore off after the attack. As Astrid stood and took her mug, Atali stared into the fire and said, "Do you think they'll be okay?" "Who?" "The razor whips. The babies." Astrid filled Atali's mug and handed it back to her. "Yes," she said confidently as she sat back down and picked up her tea again. "How can you be so sure?" "Toothless." Astrid shrugged. "I know Toothless will make sure they're safe and cared for. He knows it's an important job. If he didn't, he wouldn't have come to your aid and taken them to safety." Atali nodded slowly, still staring into the fire. Astrid began to wonder what she saw in it. "And what about my wing maidens?" Atali asked quietly. Astrid considered before she spoke. "It'll be an adjustment, whatever the next step for your tribe is. But they will be alright in time. They'll find a new purpose. They'll heal in their own ways." Astrid watched Atali's face carefully, but she showed no emotion. She no longer gulped down her ale, but instead held it gingerly against her stomach. "It's strange," Atali finally said in a distant voice. "No one knew about the wing maidens before. We were always a tribe that hid from the rest of the world, knowing that our sacred duty was to protect the razor whips and their young. We were always comfortable with that. Happy, even, knowing that no one else in the world knew that we existed. Even after our tribe was made known to the archipelago, our allies worked to ensure our existence was made into a legend, a bedtime story, so that we may once again work in peace without the world knowing our existence. But now that our island is destroyed, now that our mission is one we will never be able to return to, the world is none the wiser, because to them we never existed in the first place." She shook her head sadly, but had nothing more to say. The weight of her words settled heavily on Astrid's chest. She had never quite thought about it in that way. "But those legends still exist," Astrid offered. "That legacy could still live on. Just like the legends of the dragons." Atali scoffed. "The dragons are not present to watch their existence reduced to mere legends. She took a deep swig of ale. Astrid wasn't sure how to comfort her about that. I believe I will accept your husband's offer. I am not ignorant enough to ignore the fact that my tribe of women cannot survive on our own. We may be able to support ourselves, but we cannot produce the offspring needed to keep our tribe alive alone. I can only pray to the gods that my women find a way to keep together as a whole. Astrid wasn't sure she completely understood what Atali meant, but her sentiment rang clear regardless. Newberg will happily help you and your tribe in any way we can. Atali nodded. Thank you. After continuing to stare into the fire for a few moments, she asked, has Hiccup extended the same offer to young Eason? Astrid sipped her tea. Apparently he had, per Eason's comment in the woods earlier. Astrid had known that was Hiccup's plan, but she hadn't known he was going to ask him so soon. She didn't know exactly what happened or how the conversation went, and she didn't feel like trying to explain all of that. She glanced at Atali, whose eyes seemed clouded over from the ale. A little white lie wouldn't hurt. If he hasn't already, I'm sure he will soon. Why? If Atali heard her, she didn't answer the question directly. I'm sure it is a difficult situation for him. How is he handling it? Astrid sighed. Not well. You've seen as much of him as we have. Zephyr is helping him, I think. She shook her head. It was hard enough, watching Hiccup go through that. Trying to figure out how to run a tribe and grieve the untimely loss of his father and all that. But Hiccup at least had Valka and me. Sure, Eason has Zephyr, but they don't have the history that Hiccup and I did. And Eason doesn't even have his mother. I can't imagine what he's thinking. He must feel so alone. Atali took a long drink of her ale. Do you think he wonders about his mother? I'm sure he does. I know Hiccup did until he found Valka. Has anyone told him about her? Astrid sipped her tea while she thought back. I don't think so. No one really knew anything about her. Except for Alvin, of course. Maybe Keldon, but he didn't survive the raid. As far as I know, no one else knew who she was. She shook her head sadly and sipped some more of her tea. Atali's grip seemed to loosen on her mug, it fell sadly into her lap, still held upright by the limp grasp of her fingers. I knew her. Astrid nearly dropped her tea. Some spilled down the front of her tunic before she managed to set her cup upright again. Wiping her mouth with her sleeve, she coughed. What did you just say? I knew her, Atali whispered, tears in her eyes as she stared into the fire. I knew Era. She was my dearest friend. Notes. Okay, updates. I have officially graduated, and as of this week I found out that I passed my licensure board exam, so excited. So with that being said, I should be able to post much more often now that I am completely done with school. My plan is to get back to the every other week schedule, however I'm not going to guarantee that right now just because I am starting a new job in the next few weeks. But I'm hoping that as I adjust to my new schedule and settle into my new job, I'll be able to find a lot more time to write. If you want more detailed updates as I have them or want to discuss the chapters with some other readers, I still have my Discord server open. Invite link here, https://discord.gg/nufak. Chapter 21, Era's Story. Notes. ****************************************** TW, mention of child loss, post-traumatic stress ********************************** Chapter text. Eason scrubbed the heels of his hands into his eyes as he sat in the great hall for the evening meal. Today had been a bit overwhelming to say the least. After Hiccup's more than generous offer, the argument with the Burkian, and avoiding Zephyr all day, he was a bit exhausted. And now he had to sit and keep an eye on his elders in case the Burkian or his buddies decided to try for round 2. Not that he necessarily minded that part, he knew they needed to eat. It wasn't that he was upset with his elders, but he was definitely still pissed off at the way the Burkian had spoken to them earlier. He almost hoped he'd come around and try to start something again. Eason was in the mood to knock someone out. He flinched. That wasn't something he was used to thinking, used to feeling. He had never been a violent person. But the last few days, weeks. How long had it been, he found himself feeling more and more hostile. He didn't like it. He felt so So different, so foreign to himself. In fact, he hadn't felt like himself since he sailed back home from Newburgh after Zephyr's birthday. Zephyr told him that was okay. Zephyr told him he'd seen so many horrible things, it was okay to feel the way he did, scared, confused, frustrated, empty. Different. Zephyr said no one could blame him for that. He trusted Zephyr. But he knew Zephyr was still young. And maybe she didn't yet know how cruel people could be, how much they expected of young Viking men and what they should be capable of, what they should be able to handle. Hell, Ethan wasn't much older, and he was only just now learning some of it. Then again, now that he thought about it, he would give anything to make sure Zephyr didn't learn the way he had to. A slight and frail figure carefully sat next to Ethan, clutching a bowl of hot food and frantically looking around the great hall. Ethan's heart ached. "Hello, Nana," he kindly greeted the woman. "Did you get enough to eat?" She glanced at Ethan for a split second and nodded before looking back around the room. He sighed to himself. Nana was such a sweet woman, and one of the few who had always supported Ethan's place in the tribe without question. But given her past, he wasn't surprised to see her so guarded now. She'd been stabbed in the back and betrayed one too many times. It was part of the reason she ended up on Outcast to begin with. And now the only island she'd been able to call her own, the tribe that took her in as family without question, was nearly extinct. Ethan was filled with rage all over again. Those Burkians trying to keep her and the others from eating, denying them basic needs despite having done nothing, blaming them for things they couldn't control, it was exactly how her original tribe had treated her after she had attempted to heal that poor sick infant. Ethan slid closer to Nana and placed a gentle hand on her back. "It's okay, Nana, go ahead and eat. I'll keep watch for you. You didn't do anything wrong. They won't hurt you as long as I'm here." He smiled warmly at her to emphasize his sentiment. Nana looked at him and relaxed a little. She patted his knee. "You were always such a sweet boy, Ethan," she said before hunching over her meal and happily eating. "Thanks, Nana," he said, trying to ignore how weak her voice was when she spoke, or how fragile her body felt when he touched her. She did not handle the trips well. She didn't look ill, thank the gods. Ethan just prayed it stayed that way. She wouldn't survive if she fell victim to sickness. That is, if the stress didn't get to her first. Even with Ethan watching over her, she couldn't fully relax. He couldn't blame her, she had been banished from her original tribe under false accusations, and no doubt was afraid the same would happen here. She'd been through enough loss and heartache in her life, she'd looked death in the eyes far too many times. She didn't deserve any more of it. He glanced back to the corner of the hall where the majority of the rest of his tribe still was. With at least half of the refugee outcasts being elderly, they still weren't strong enough to move very much. Keeping them in the hall kept them warm and ensured they wouldn't have to venture far for food, and made caring for them easier for Tough Nut. The young women were helpful, many of them taking quite an interest in Tough Nut's abilities as well, which inclined Tough Nut to make them sort of a force of unofficial apprentices. They stayed with the elders and made sure they were taken care of, and ran to get Tough Nut or Rough Nut if anything serious happened. The children also stayed close to the women and elders, as they didn't recognize anyone else. The elders obviously enjoyed watching and playing with the children when they could, so Ethan saw no need in making the children stay anywhere else. The young men, mostly just sailing apprentices, though Ethan recognized one as a blacksmith apprentice and one who was supposed to begin his scribing apprenticeship before everything, were out around the village doing whatever Hiccup needed help with, something Ethan requested of them as a thank you to Hiccup for saving them. The young men hadn't objected even once. He sighed. He wished he could do more, but he didn't know what else to do. He was afraid his tribe would think he wasn't doing enough. He knew he wasn't around them as often as he should be. He knew they expected him to act as their chief. He just. A bowl appeared in front of him with a quiet tap, followed by a spoon plopping into the stew inside of it. Ethan looked up to find Zephyr walking away while pointing at the bowl and ordering, "Eat." He grimaced. So much for avoiding her. Nana chuckled. "That one's a spitfire. Just like her granddad." Ethan sighed. "Yes, she is." It wasn't that Ethan was avoiding Zephyr specifically. He more so just wanted to avoid everyone. Unfortunately Astrid put a stop to that when he frightened her in the woods. He supposed he was kinda glad about it though after the scene they stumble on in the hall. Astrid didn't need to be breaking up fights while pregnant. He absolutely believed she could, he just didn't believe she should. But now that things seemed to have calmed down, he just wanted to run away again. Away from the anger and sadness and hostility. Away from all the eyes watching his every move. She'd make a good wife, you know. Toughen you up a bit. Nana. Ethan choked. His cheeks reddened. He awkwardly chuckled. You can't just say stuff like that. Sure I can. When you're as old as me, you don't give a shit what people think. She sipped her soup innocently. Besides, you're both heirs. It's meant to be. Ethan rolled his eyes. I've never been one for politics. I know. Your father told me so. She chuckled, a sound that had strong roots in her chest but weakened to a slight rush of air by the time it reached her lips. He worried it would scare you from the job. Ethan didn't have anything to say to that. Ethan caught her smiling to herself. You look at that young lady the way my late husband used to look at me. Ethan flinched. No offense, Nana, but I don't know if I like being compared to him. Nana laughed. He loved me back then. He truly did. Ethan bit his tongue. Her late husband had left her after she had lost her fifth child before it had been born. She had lost every child she managed to conceive. Most died before their birth, one died 4 days after. Her husband had grown sick of waiting for an heir. Ethan didn't think that sounded much like love. Don't judge him too harshly. Parents cannot be held liable for the things they do after losing a child, Nana chided. At least he never called me aside like the rest of the tribe. Yeah, well he didn't defend you when they banished you either, Ethan bit back. He could feel Nana freeze beside him, but he couldn't bring himself to look at her. The bitter taste of his words embedded itself in his tongue. He didn't like the way it felt. He sighed. Nana, I'm sorry, Grief is an incredible force, she said. Ethan took that as his cue to shut up. And losing someone you love is the greatest source of grief there is. A fragile hand laid on his arm. Do you know why that is? Ethan shook his head. It leaves a hole, Ethan, deep within you. And you cannot truly heal until you find a way to fill that hole. The deeper the bond, the deeper the hole. I can't replace my father, Nana, he whispered. You're right, you can't. And it wouldn't fill the hole anyway. Ethan scrubbed his head. But you just said. She said, wagging a finger at him. It's not so simple. The person isn't what filled the hole. The person gave you something that completed you, or losing them took something vital away from you. Do you understand? As much as he tried, he couldn't quite put the pieces together. Nana smiled with understanding. When my husband left me, I lost the one man I could always trust. The day we married, he promised he would never leave me. He broke that promise. He broke my trust. Ethan closed his eyes. Keldon gave you someone to trust again. Nana patted his arm. Exactly. I never married him, because he would never replace my husband. But he fulfilled my need to trust someone when he brought me to Outcast Island, and when he pled my case to your father. And so he became my dearest friend. It made sense. Ethan always wondered why Nana and Keldon never married, despite being so close to each other. But now it all made sense. I'm sorry you lost him, Ethan said. Keldon, I mean. Nana shook her head. We're not talking about me right now. We're talking about you. She leaned closer. What did you lose when you lost your father? The list seemed endless to Ethan. A father, an entire family, a mentor, a protector, a chief. Not physical things, Ethan. Nana reached over to pat his chest. In here. What did you lose inside of you? Ethan felt a heaviness settle in his chest. A sense of belonging, maybe. Security, she suggested. Is there someone new in your life that can give you that missing piece back? Ethan's eyes lifted immediately and scanned the room. And when they stopped, they fell on Zephyr standing across the hall speaking with fish legs. And once they found her, they wouldn't leave her. Nana chuckled. I thought so. Nana began to stand up next to Ethan. He shook himself from his trance and jumped up as well to help her, keeping a supportive hand on her elbow as she shuffled back to her seat among the other outcasts and securing his own bowl with his free hand. She smiled at him and settled in, saying something about a good boy and patting Ethan's arm like a beloved animal. As she pulled her borrowed furs around her shoulders, a young outcast woman took a seat next to Nana and helped her into a more comfortable position. Satisfied that Nana was taken care of for now, Ethan turned and stepped out of the makeshift camp, handing his bowl to an elderly man who seemed to be just waking up from a nap. Ethan wasn't very hungry right now anyway, especially after the conversation with Nana, and this man could use some more meat on his bones, maybe help stave off some illness. As he glanced back one more time, everyone seemed content enough and taken care of, so Ethan decided he was safe to step out of the hole for some air. As he put more and more distance between him and his tribe, he noticed himself instinctually walking towards the guest accommodations. Most of them housed wing maidens, a few were inhabited by outcasts, mostly the young men, as the women generally didn't want to leave the children and elders, and of course Ethan's room. Sometimes he felt he too should move his belongings into the Great Hall, sit among his tribe's elders and women and children in order to better protect them. But doing so felt like submitting himself to the realities of the situation, not all of which he was ready to face. Zephyr would probably call it selfish. He didn't really care. Thwick. Ethan snapped his head around at the sound. He found 3 young boys nearby in between 2 houses. They had one bow amongst them, and seemed to be shooting arrows into one of the walls. One of the boys took the bow and slipped the nock onto the string. The boy wasn't near as graceful with the motions as the last man Ethan had seen shoot an arrow. He drew, took aim at nothing in particular, and released the arrow. Snap. The arrow struck true into the side of the building. Thwick. Off. Ethan closed his eyes and turned, quickly running from the boys. He knew the last sound wasn't real, but he heard it so clearly. It wasn't real, right? It wasn't real. But was it? Another boy snatched the bow, knocked an arrow, and... snap. Thwick. Off. Ethan shook his head violently. No, no, it couldn't be real. It couldn't. Snap. Thwick. Off. But he heard it, so it was so clearly there. Snap. Thwick. Off. No, 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 no. Ethan ran away from the sounds, an entirely instinctual reaction he had no control over. His legs pushed harder as the sounds ran circles in his head, like a chanting side dances around a fire. He tried to run away from the image of the blood-soaked arrowhead, but it just kept following him. Snap. Thwick. Off. Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Ethan's head snapped up. He tripped over his own feet at the new sound. He looked frantically around as he barely caught himself from falling. He was by the forge. Hiccup was sharpening his sword. He stared at it. He stared at the sword, waiting for it to find its victim, waiting for the metal to slice through soft skin. Shhhhh. 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 Thud. Ethan could hear it so clearly, louder than all the other sounds. He felt sick. He bent over as if the sound had knocked the air from his lungs. No, not again, not again. Ethan. Ethan looked up. He saw Harver. Harver was looking at him. Sir. Sir. Harver's voice drifted in through the haze, but he sounded so far away. Sir, we have to move. Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Thud. Sir, I beg ye. Ye have to give me a hand here. Ethan didn't do well with conflict. Come on, sir, move your feet, one step at a time, please. Alvin had always done everything in his power to protect Ethan. Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Thud. Wake up, it's me. Ethan. Harver didn't call him a. Ethan looked up again. Harver was gone. He just saw Zephyr. He saw Zephyr. He saw Zephyr's blue eyes. They were watery. They flicked between his eyes frantically. It's okay. It's just me, she repeated softly. She reached up and touched his cheek, just a gentle brush of her fingers. It's just me, you're okay. Ethan looked down. He was breathing heavily, kneeling in the road, tears in his eyes. He scrubbed his eyes. His heart was racing. He looked around. Harva was nowhere in sight. Hey, it's okay. She cupped his face with both of her hands now, guiding his eyes back to her. She searched his eyes carefully. Ethan let her. He let himself be lost in the sea of blue before him. She pursed her lips. I know that look, she whispered. I've seen it before. You weren't here. You were back there, weren't you? On Outcast. Ethan's eyes filled with tears again. He nodded silently. Zephyr nodded empathetically back at him. It's okay, she repeated. It's not happening again. It's all over. He won't hurt you like that again. Ethan let himself believe her. She rocked back on her heels, and stood up. Bending back over, she took his hands in hers. She was so gentle. She was so kind. Come on, let's get you home, okay? Okay. He stood carefully. He still didn't feel right. He felt dizzy, disoriented. He felt like he wasn't actually in control of his body. But that was okay. Zephyr was here. Zephyr had him. Zephyr was in control. He saw Hiccup behind her. Hiccup stared at him. Ethan didn't like the way he was staring at him. Zephyr turned him around. She led him away from the forge, away from the street, away from the village. He saw a seemingly endless number of eyes watching him. He didn't like it. But Zephyr was leading him away, and that was good. The eyes didn't follow. He wondered what she meant when she said she had seen that look before. How did she know? Are you okay? She asked once they were in the comfort of the trees. Ethan nodded. He didn't have the strength to do much else. Zephyr didn't seem convinced. She led him up the hill, up the path, up the stairs. She watched him carefully the whole way. She opened the door for him, ushered him inside, led him back to his private quarters. As she opened the door for him, he caught a glimpse of his bed. He was immediately both relieved and distressed. As exhausted as he was, he knew the nightmares would be especially bad tonight. They always were when he was reminded of. Zephyr seemed to sense something was wrong. You don't have to go to sleep if you don't want to. I just thought you might like some privacy. Ethan's eyes didn't leave his bed. Thank you, he said. He chose to ignore how weak his voice sounded. He stood for a moment in the doorway, not sure what to do. He heard Zephyr chuckle softly. More like just a rush of air from her nose, but the sound was endearing. It suited her. She lit a candle across the room before crossing back over to him. Come here, sit down, she said, less of an order and more of a request. Zephyr gently pushed him out of the doorway so she could close it behind them. She guided him to the bed and made him sit. She stood in front of him. Ethan couldn't help but notice that even with him sitting and her standing in front of him, the top of his head still reached her nose. Her nose scrunched up. Ethan liked the way it looked. When was the last time you brushed out your hair? Truth be told, he didn't know. She muttered something under her breath that Ethan didn't quite catch. He was distracted by the gentle rummaging of her fingers around the leather strap in his hair. She managed to free the tie and set it on the bed next to Ethan, looking around the room. In the drawer. The desk. Ethan nodded in the direction of the structure across the room. It was a desk with a tall cabinet-like structure attached to one side. Something Hiccup thought up, Ethan was sure. Suddenly, the words Nana had said earlier drifted into his thoughts. A sense of belonging, maybe. Security. Is there someone new in your life that can give you that missing piece back? Security. And then the name Zephyr had called him whispered in his head. You called me he softly stated. Earlier, too, I mean. Zephyr's rummaging slowed as she thought over what he had just said. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. No one calls me that, Ethan continued to think out loud. It woke me up. Zephyr stopped entirely, examining Ethan's face now with a look he couldn't quite place. She slowly returned to her searching and checked another drawer before muttering, "Ah, here it is," pulling out a brush. Ethan's heart clenched, as it often did when he saw the brush. Alvin said it belonged to his mother. Alvin never was one to brush his hair. He preferred the treacherous heathen look. He had offered the token to Ethan as he had grown older and his hair grew longer. She stood in front of him, her legs brushing against his own, and set the brush down on the bed beside him. She reached up with gentle fingers and began unraveling his braids, which apparently hadn't fallen out on their own. "You told me to wake up," Ethan whispered. Zephyr's fingers slowed. "You said, wake up." She met his eyes. "I did, yeah. How did you know?" She seemed to consider his words as she turned back to his braids, and at first Ethan was afraid she'd misunderstand the question. But after a moment she said, "Well, you don't drop to your knees in the middle of the village street very often." She offered a small smile with her joke, "So I ran over to see if you were okay." Her eyebrows pinched together and her lips twitched as if a bee had stung her. "I said your name, and you acted like you heard me. But when you looked at me, you weren't. You weren't looking at me, it was like you were focused on something. I don't know, something far away, something past me. You responded to me speaking, but you weren't actually responding to me, like something was just off." She looked at him again. "Like you were lost in a bad dream." They stared into each other's eyes for a moment, Zephyr's fingers still mindlessly unraveling Ethan's tiny braids, until he thought of something else. "You said you knew that look. You said you saw it before." Zephyr nodded slowly. "Yes, I did. On me." "Yes. When?" Zephyr bit her lip. "The day you told me what that invader did to your father." Ethan felt sick again. He didn't like that. He wanted it to go away. He focused on something good. "You called me," he repeated. Zephyr nodded. "Yes. I didn't mean to." "No one calls me that," he repeated. "It was different. It didn't sound right in my dream. I knew it didn't belong. It woke me up. And then I saw you." Zephyr watched him carefully. She slowly reached up to wipe away a tear from Ethan's cheek. "I can keep calling you that if you want," she softly offered. Ethan found himself nodding in response. Zephyr nodded back. "Okay." Her eyes drifted to his hair again. "All right, come here. Let's fix you up again." She picked up the brush and stood in front of him again. She gently brushed his hair, starting at his face and reaching around him to push the brush through his locks to the ends. Ethan saw the peaceful look in her eyes. It seemed to flow throughout her body and bleed from her fingertips into the brush and across Ethan's head. He took a deep breath. It made her smile. Not so shaky that time, she whispered, keeping her focus on his hair. "That's good." He liked the way her smile lifted her cheek. It made her eyes kinder. When her smile was genuine, she would squint just a little. Her nose would do the same little scrunch too if she found something amusing. Ethan liked that too. Sometimes she looked too harsh, too solid. He liked that part of her, but he liked seeing this softer side too. It reminded him she had so many different sides, so many different talents and potentials. His gaze slid down her nose and fell on her lips. The soft grace of the smile she had a moment ago stayed even when the smile itself faded. One corner remained slightly lifted as if she enjoyed the moment she found herself in. They looked a little rough, no doubt from the winter air settling in and being exposed to the wind. They added a bit of strength back to her features even in the soft candlelight. Ethan always admired how she could switch so quickly and seamlessly from hard as a rock to soft as a flower and back again. "There," she said, obviously pleased with her work. She set the brush down on the bed next to Ethan. She ran her fingers through his tamed locks. "Just as handsome as ever." Ethan smiled and lifted his eyes back to hers just in time for them to meet. A soft pink rose up in her cheeks, and her fingers slowed in his hair. His heart skipped a beat. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." He could feel her breath brush against his cheek. He hadn't realized they had gotten so close. She was standing between his knees now. His heart began to race. He couldn't help himself. He leaned in closer. And when she did too, he couldn't help but close his eyes and a knock on the door made them both jump back before they could close the distance. They looked to the door and back at each other in near unison, and by the fire burning beneath his skin, he was certain his cheeks were as bright red as Zephyr's. "Ethan, it's Astrid. Can we talk for a minute?" Zephyr's eyes widened. Ethan's did too. "I have Atali with me as well." "Atali?" Zephyr and Ethan shared a puzzled look. He thought about asking them to wait a moment so Zephyr could hide, but he didn't exactly have any hiding places in his room. Escaping out the window wasn't an option. The side of the building he was on was stilted up the side of a hill, much too high of a drop for any human to make without breaking a leg, or worse. Locking eyes with Zephyr, he could tell she was thinking the same thing. Well, this was going to get awkward. Yeah, sure, come in, he said loud enough for Astrid and Atali to hear. The door opened slowly as Astrid peeked around it. "I know it's late, but we were wondering, Zephyr." Zephyr chuckled nervously. "Hi, Mom." Astrid eyed them suspiciously. "What's?" "I was walking back from the Great Hall," Ethan interrupted. Both women stared him down. They were scarily similar. "I had another scare," he said to Astrid. "Zephyr just happened to find me this time." He smiled sheepishly, hoping it would help their innocence. Astrid immediately softened, remembering the incident in the woods Ethan was referring to when he said another scare. Zephyr gave him a confused look, but when Astrid turned sympathetic and merely said, "Oh, I see." Anyway, Zephyr didn't seem to care too much. Though Ethan knew she'd ask about it later if given the chance. "I was talking to Atali earlier," and Astrid stepped fully into the door and waved Atali in after her. "Well, I think Atali should be the one to talk to you." Astrid looked back at Ethan. "If you have time, of course. It's a bit of a extensive topic." Ethan wasn't sure how he felt about that. He definitely didn't have the energy to discuss any extensive topic tonight. But he also knew that as soon as he laid down, the nightmares would follow closely behind. And, solely based on Astrid's tone, if he didn't find out now he definitely wouldn't be sleeping tonight. They seemed very serious. It made him feel more sick. So he gestured to the chair pushed under his desk. "Have a seat, then. I have time." He looked at Astrid. "Oh, wait. I'll grab a chair from the empty room next door. You sit." Without waiting for permission, Astrid slipped out the door. Atali seemed to lose some of her confidence once Astrid had left the room. She swallowed and pulled out the chair, sat down quite uncomfortably, and cleared her throat. Zephyr didn't seem to know what to do with herself, so she stood next to the bed with her arms crossed. "I have some information that Astrid believes you may find useful," Atali began. She looked as though having this conversation was physically painful for her. "If you wish to hear it." "What is this about?" Ethan asked slowly. He could feel a pit of unease boring itself in his stomach. Atali hesitated. Astrid walked back in the room and silently sat down in her newly acquired chair in the corner of the room. She gave Atali a supportive nod. Atali didn't seem comforted. "Before I tell you what this is all about," Atali started again, "I need you to understand something. I have had this information, this knowledge, for a long time. However, I did not feel it was my place to give this information to you. Others possessed the same knowledge and were in a better position to present it to you, due to the sensitive nature of it. It wouldn't have been fair to you. However, my dear friend Astrid has brought it to my attention that I may be one of the only ones left with such information." Atali's eyes began to water, and she had to pause to compose herself. I simply ask you not become angry with me for withholding what I have for so long. It wouldn't have been right coming from me. I only present it to you now, if you wish, because I am the only option." Ethan was overwhelmed and confused. None of her words made sense, she was just rambling, and that wasn't something Atali was known for. More than that, the look she gave Ethan anytime she did manage to meet his eyes was unsettling. I don't understand," Atali pursed her lips and took a deep breath through her nose. If you wish to hear what I have to say. I have some information about your mother. About Era. Ethan's stomach dropped to his feet. No, past his feet, it dropped through his feet and the floor and the ground and the island and the sea all the way to the bottom of the ocean floor. The room spun around him. He worried he'd slip off the edge of the bed. Maybe he already had, he couldn't feel it underneath him. He couldn't feel anything at all. Oh my God, Zephyr gasped almost silently. She absent-mindedly sat on the bed next to Ethan. The sudden weight next to him gave him an anchor to ground himself a little better. He felt the warmth of her arm against his and focused on it. Please, do not be upset with me, Atali begged, refusing to meet Ethan's eyes now. I did not believe it was my place to tell you about her when Alvin was still alive. Her next words caught in her throat, but she took a gasping breath and pushed through anyway. Of course, you have every right to be upset. But the offer still stands either way. Ethan's mind was both racing and silent at the same time. No single thought was able to push to the front. He was so overwhelmed he didn't move or speak at all. He was both relieved and in disbelief of what Atali had just said to him. Atali kept her eyes on the floor. Astrid was quietly waiting, Zephyr was silently shocked. Ethan realized they were all waiting on him. What? How much can you tell me about her? Atali sadly chuckled. Anything you want to know. Ethan didn't have the mental capacity to think through that right now, neither the implications of the statement or which of the thousands upon thousands of questions he had to ask first. He wasn't sure what he had expected her to say, but anything definitely was not it. The majority of his mind still wasn't comprehending just what it was she was offering. His mother. She was offering to answer any question he ever had about his mother. Something his own father was never able to bring himself to offer. He settled on a related question that seemed disconnected enough to give him a moment to collect his thoughts. How do you know so much about her? She was a wing maiden. In fact, we were recruited together. Wing maiden. So much for collecting his thoughts. Ethan could feel his throat closing. A rush of tears overwhelmed his eyes. A wing maiden. His mother was a wing maiden. One of the most sacred warriors to walk Midgard, warriors that had the respect of all who knew of them. Of course his mother was no less. What woman could have been good enough for Alvin the Treacherous if not a wing maiden? He felt even more overwhelmed. How could he possibly live up to either of their names, their legacies? Legacies that were both now wiped from existence. But Ethan had to know. Now more than ever. Anything? He carefully asked. Atali nodded, not looking at him. More than likely, yes. He wanted to know it all. It felt like a selfish request. Atali was obviously uncomfortable and upset. But didn't Ethan have a right to know? No matter who it came from. What if he never had a chance like this again? His eyes filled with tears. He had to know. He had to know everything he could. Can you just start from the beginning? Atali looked pleadingly at Astrid. Astrid only returned a look to encourage her to continue. Atali sighed and scrubbed her face with the heels of her hands, a gesture that Ethan had never once seen the warrior make, before her hands dropped back into her lap. She stared at her hands for a while. Atali then nodded slowly, seeming to collect her thoughts. And then with another deep breath, she shakily began her story. Era's story. Chapter 22, Closure. Notes. Hello my lovely readers. I have returned with another chapter. This is a big one, so I hope you'll enjoy. Asterisk 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 TW, mention of difficult pregnancy, death after childbirth asterisk asterisk asterisk. Chapter text. Ethan could tell Atali was fighting tears with all of her might. But then again, so was he. She let out a shaky breath. Era was, she chuckled. I wish you could have met her. You're so much like her. You have her heart, her instinct to protect. A few tears escaped her eyes. She quickly scrubbed them away and sniffed. I'm sorry, it's been years since I've talked about her. Ethan was instantly conflicted. Her wish that Erison had met his own mother stung deep, so much so that he flinched when she said it. She couldn't know how much he shared that wish. And it filled him with a raging jealousy that he did not like. It wasn't like him. It was like the anger he felt earlier in the day at the hostile Burkian. It didn't belong in his body or his mind, he knew it didn't belong there. But it was there anyway, the rage and the jealousy. And he felt like he couldn't do anything about it, he felt like he was helpless to the fact that it now consumed him no matter how much he tried to ignore it. And yet a small part of him, the old him as he's heard Zephyr refer to it he supposed, couldn't ignore that Atali crying wasn't normal either. She didn't cry. She was a hardened warrior and chief. But she had experienced something that was difficult to deal with just like he did, and now she was being forced to talk about it. He could empathize with that. And that small, old part of him wanted to tell her that it was okay, she didn't have to tell him anything, she didn't have to relive those painful memories. Just like he always told his father. But now his father was gone. He had repeated those words over and over for so long, and now he would never be able to repeat them again. Now he would never even have the chance to change his mind and beg his father to go on, relive the memories, tell Ethan everything. He couldn't make that mistake again. Not when, as far as he knew, Atali was the only one left that could tell him the only part of his own history that he didn't know because his father never had the fucking strength to tell him. Ethan choked. He took a deep breath. That wasn't him. That anger wasn't him. What was wrong with him? Astrid reached for Atali's hand. She must have meant a lot to you, she encouraged with a soft smile. Atali nodded. She returned Astrid's smile for a moment and whispered, I'm all right, but didn't let go of Astrid's hand. She met Ethan's eyes. We're not here for me. We're here for you. I know that. Ethan didn't know what to do, didn't know how to feel. He was too overwhelmed. He hadn't felt this many emotions at once in his life. Not even as he watched his own father slain before his eyes. He almost felt guilty for it, but he didn't have the time nor the mental capacity to think through that right now. It took all his strength just to push down the anger and jealousy enough to actually listen to Atali's words as she truly began her story. Era and I were very close for as long as I can remember, despite her being 12 years older than me. We were born in the same small village, the same family. She was a cousin of mine, the daughter of my father's sister. I suppose that makes you and I family as well. I hadn't thought about it much until today, our tribe was so small that everyone was related to each other in one way or another. Atali's face twisted in pain. I suppose that makes it even worse that I never said anything about this to you. Ethan could feel the rage creeping up his chest again, he could feel the fire licking at his neck, rising to his cheeks. He begged it to burn out, just for now, just so that he could remember the things Atali said about his mother. Atali shook her head and pushed on. Our village was struggling, to say the least. Not many children lived past the first year. Era and I were some of the lucky few. I believe there were only 6 other children born within the 5 years before or after I was born. 3 of them died. I'm not sure what happened to the other 2. It didn't matter much, either way. When I was 4 years old and Era was 16, our village had an unusually hard year. Many of our livestock grew ill and were unfit to consume, but the harvest was decent enough that we believed we would be alright. Until the flood. We believed the gods were angry with us, but we didn't know why. The ground shook violently beneath us and toppled some of our homes, heavily damaging others. We began to rebuild as best as we could, but then a great wave approached faster than we could prepare for it. It swallowed our docks and boats as if they were nothing and rushed onto the land. The homes that were still standing were practically sunken. The fields became pools of mud and uprooted crops. Most of the village was swept away in the swell, sinking beneath the water and never resurfacing, sucked out to sea between waves. Era and I were out in the woods when it happened. After the earthquake stopped, my mother asked her to take me out of the village. The shaking had frightened me, and she thought that being away from the destruction would help. That's what Era told me, at least. She wouldn't have lied to me. She was teaching me to climb trees, showing me different traps her father had taught her to set. We had ventured deep into the island, not necessarily on purpose. But that was when the waves came. It was so strange, watching the water fill in the forest beneath us. Era must have heard it. She rushed me up into a tree just before it swept beneath us. We were deep enough towards the middle of the island that it wasn't strong enough to uproot the trees around us, but we heard trees crashing into water in the direction of the village. The water began to recede and we tried to make our way back to the village, but more swells followed. We stayed inland, keeping away from the water. I wanted to go back, to find my mother and my father. Atali bit her lip, tears flowing with more frequency now. Era wouldn't let me. She told me that we should find a good place to hide, where we would be safe, and that our parents would come find us when it was safe to return. But they never did. She made a good camp for us in the middle of the island up a cliffside. She kept me safe and fed, though I couldn't tell you how. I stuck close to her, she only left me when she had to hunt. She would teach me things to keep me distracted. I had awful nightmares at night. She would hold me, tell me it was all right and that we were safe. She kept me alive. After a while, when it seemed like the water would never fully release our island, we had to accept that we were the only survivors. We were running out of resources, so she built a boat and we began floating off. Now that I think about it, I don't think she had a plan or knew where we were floating off to. She just knew that we didn't have any more options on that island. We packed as much food and fresh water as we could and just floated off into the sea. We didn't even have a sail, just some paddles that she built. We floated for some time. I couldn't tell you how long. Long enough that we were running low on food and water despite rationing it very carefully. We were hungry and tired and windburnt and sunburnt, Era worse than I because she cared for me before herself. But eventually, we were rescued. Some wing maidens were flying over, patrolling, so we must not have been too far off from the island. They picked us up and flew us back to the tribe, nursed us to health, fed us, sheltered us. The chiefess at the time, Region, came and spoke to Era. She wanted to know our story, why we were out on the water seemingly stranded. So Era told her. A few days later, she came to speak with Era again. She wanted Era to train to be a wing maiden. She explained how they often recruited orphaned girls, especially older ones who had survived on their own and proven their strength. It gave them a place to go, a tribe to belong to, and it gave the tribe more women to carry out the sacred mission. After listening to Region explain what would be expected of her for a while, she agreed on the condition that I could stay with her. They didn't agree right away, I'm not sure why. But Era assured them that I would be her responsibility and she would raise me to be a wing maiden as well. I don't think it was particularly difficult for them to say yes, and even if it was, they seemed to take me in very quickly. Yes, Era primarily raised me, but the tribe raised me as a whole as well. Era primarily raised me. The words rang through Eason's head, the jealousy bubbled up again. He tried to focus no matter how much he didn't want to hear what happened next. He just wanted her to skip to his parents' meeting, to tell their story. He didn't want to hear about his mother raising some other girl that wasn't hers when she couldn't even raise her own blood son. Atali stared at the floor, lost in thought. She was a great protector. She was like a mother to me after I lost my own. She would have been an amazing mother to you, I know it. I only wish she had had the chance. Eason worked so hard to keep his emotions in check that he felt nauseous. His fists clenched to the point that he wondered if his nails were drawing blood in his palms. Thankfully, Atali moved on. Region made sure we were cared for and trained well. She began my training as soon as Era would let her. They let me interact with the baby razor whips from the beginning, so I was eager for my chance to train my own. I was 15. Era was so proud. And I proudly held that role until I was 23. Region fell ill and needed someone to take over. She chose me, though I was worried the older women would be angry. But they agreed with her reasoning, that being raised in the tribe from my youngest years I knew little else outside of being a wing maiden, and they were also happy to have watched me grow into such a role. I met Hiccup and the Dragon Riders a few years later, I believe when I was 26. It was after the fall of Krugen, Johan, and the Dragon Hunters that we met Alvin. I was 27. Era was 43. Eason's eyes locked onto the floor. His vision narrowed, but he was listening intently to Atali. A silence, a heaviness fell on the room. Atali must have sensed it too. She took a deep breath. Alvin, after mending ties with Burke, wanted to do the same with Burke's other allies. He wanted to build a better network for his tribe. It was the moment everyone saw that he not only turned around but wouldn't go back to his old ways either. I believe he met with Dagur first, and then Mala. He came to Wingmaiden Island last, but didn't know anything about our island or culture. They anchored on the northern side of the island and walked straight through the breeding grounds where the mothers lived. Of course, our Wingmaidens intervened immediately, and Era happened to be the one that grabbed Alvin. They flew the men, his fleet was entirely men, to some nearby sea stacks. Era tended to his injuries while severely scolding the man for his ignorance. He attempted to interrupt her once, and she all but threw him off the sea stack for it. He didn't attempt again. I've never seen anyone put him in his place like Era could. Eason's eyes stung with tears. His heart ached. We eventually moved them to a nearby island where they could set up camp. We corresponded with them for a few weeks. Era, Minden, Nadia, and I would fly over to the island each day to discuss politics and draft a treaty and whatnot. Era was quite vocal in these meetings, challenging Alvin on everything he said. I would have intervened, but he wasn't angered by it. In fact, he almost seemed to enjoy their banter. So I let it go. I had offered some night sentries for them in the final nights so they could properly prepare for the journey home, as it was a long trip crossing the entire archipelago. Era volunteered. I found later that she managed some private conversations with Alvin. I should have seen it back then, but I didn't. I was still fairly new at my position, and I was more preoccupied with making sure I was doing right by my tribe to see that they were falling for each other. For him, I think it was her strong will, her refusal to back down from him. For her, I think she saw how much he was struggling to right the wrongs of his past. I think she could see a compassionate side in him that he was trying to nurture for the first time in his life, but he didn't know how to do that. She broke his shell. Atali looked up to Eason for the first time since she had started her story. I know it's not my place to speak for them, she admitted. I only offer my opinion to paint the best picture of the two of them that I can. Since you didn't have the chance to see them together. Eason could only nod silently. He could feel the heaviness of sorrow blanketing his body, straight through to his soul. Atali paused for a moment, probably waiting for another response from Eason, before continuing. They exchanged letters over the next year. Eason's head spun. Letters, records of their direct conversations, personal and intimate words meant for each other, physical documentation of the love they shared. He remembered his father mentioning those letters. It was in a room, just like this one. Zephyr's birthday. He had said they'd sent letters to each other for a year, and he didn't even answer the first few, but his mother was persistent. So he finally started sending letters back. Letters that Eason would never get to read. Because no doubt they would have been on Wingmaiden Island and Outcast Island. Two islands that were now burned to the ground. His chest heaved. His vision blurred. He felt like his head was trapped underwater. He struggled to breath. He felt gentle fingers intertwine between his own. A hand rested on his arm. He looked up to the calming sea of blue staring back at him. He could breathe a little easier now. Not much, but a little. It's okay, Zephyr whispered. We don't have to go on. We can save the rest for another day. Save the rest for another day. Like he always did with his father. His mind suddenly cleared. He had to know, he had to hear it all now. No. No, I want to keep going. Zephyr nodded and glanced towards Atali. Atali must have responded. Eason didn't hear anything but Zephyr nodded back. Okay, she said. She hesitated for a moment, but then slid closer to Eason until their sides touched. She kept her hand folded tightly in his and wrapped the other around his back. It felt safe. All right, Atali continued. Well, I'm sure if Era hadn't had a duty to her baby raise or whip, she would have left with Alvin sooner. But she waited until the baby was old enough to be released in early spring, at which point Alvin sailed out to Wingmaiden Island. He decided to sail on his own in a small ship, no crew with him. I can only guess as to why. Perhaps it was too personal of an errand for him, having never fallen in love before. Perhaps it was his way to prove his bravery. But whatever the reason, he sailed on his own to our island. The pit in Erison's stomach grew as he suddenly remembered some of the advice his father had given him. What were the words he used? Suddenly the words hit him like a brick. Always remember, son, a man should never sail alone. He had said it about his mother. Ethan felt sick for what was coming next. But he had to know, before it was too late. Before he lost his chance again. She obviously didn't have a family or a father to speak to, so he came to me instead. He offered a generous dowry, and Era was so happy that I couldn't say no. He stayed for a while on a nearby island, maybe 2 months. He completed the arrangements with me, came and went to complete some business with Dager and Mala while he was on that side of the archipelago, and then stayed for another week or so to prepare to leave. Era spent a lot of time with him in those 2 months. We made sure everything was finalized. Alvin checked the boat for the long trip back. We provided the few supplies he needed to make sure everything was in working condition before sailing. She left with him a week later. We made sure they were well supplied, and then some just in case they ran into trouble. I thought they'd be fine. Era knew how to sail well, and so did Alvin. It wasn't a large ship, it's not like it needed a large crew. As long as they were smart, they should have been fine. But then a storm came through. And they must have been caught in it. Alvin told me the boat took damage and they ended up stuck on Breakneck Bog. They had to wait out the storm for a few days before they were able to truly survey the impact. The ship was mostly in one piece, but they found the damage was much more significant than they originally thought. Fixable, they had the right tools on the ship and there were enough resources on Breakneck that they could manage, but it would take time with only the 2 of them to fix it. But he said they were optimistic in the beginning. Era found out she was pregnant with you not long after that. Alvin had told me later that he was terrified but surprisingly happy. He had said Era was ecstatic, which I fully believe. They were alright for a while, but then Era's morning sickness started to get the best of her. She wasn't able to eat much, and she grew weaker. They had about half of the ship repaired at this point, but Alvin wouldn't let Era help with the repairs after she started getting sick. The repairs were slowed significantly with half the hands to make them, and even more so with Alvin splitting his time between repairing and caring for Era. He managed to get a hold of a few terrible terrors and tried to send a distress message to Burke. He never got a response, but he thought it was because the terrors got lost. He wouldn't have had any way of knowing Burke was in the midst of their battle with Drago. By the time Alvin finished the repairs well enough that the ship could sail, Era was well into her pregnancy and not doing well, and winter was setting in. He was still a ways from Outcast and feared Era wouldn't make it that far without help. So he made the decision to sail to Burke instead, being the closest friendly tribe. And when he arrived there, well, Burke was recovering from the Battle of the Bewilderbeast, and... Wait, what? Astrid interrupted. That can't be right. Alvin came to help us rebuild, to help Hiccup. Everyone stared back at Atali. Atali nodded slowly. He wanted everyone to think that. Atali, what are you talking about? Please, Astrid, I swear I will explain. Ethan looked at Astrid and saw a bit of pain behind her eyes, though he could tell she was trying to hide it. All right, Astrid finally said. Atali nodded. Hiccup was obviously overwhelmed, having just lost his father and been thrown into chiefing. I don't even know if Alvin told him the whole story. But Hiccup offered Gothai's services, and Alvin offered his own in exchange. He sent a terror mail to me as soon as he got to the island, and I arrived the next day. Hold on, Astrid interrupted again. I'm sorry, I knew you were there, and Gothai was helping an injured wing maiden, but... That was Era. Alvin was the one that brought the injured wing maiden. And she wasn't actually injured, she was pregnant. Atali nodded. Why? Who? I wish I had answers about that, but I was too distraught to be paying attention to whatever else was going on at the time. Atali said, her pain evident in her face. Alvin, of course, was distraught as well. But he had better ways of channeling it than I did. Even if he did seem upset, the Burkians probably assumed it was from the loss of Stoic, being his best friend. Why would Hiccup keep that from me? Astrid asked. I don't think he fully knew himself, Atali reminded her. I think Alvin told him that Era was sick and pregnant and asked him not to ask any more questions outside of that. I think he was trying to protect Era, and Ethan too. They weren't married, Ethan croaked. He hadn't intended to speak, the words just slipped out on their own. But his voice was thick and raspy with suppressed tears. Astrid looked at Ethan. Dad never got a chance to marry Mom. I'm a bastard. He wouldn't have wanted to taint her reputation in case she survived. He would have given as little information as possible so that he could build the story later. Ethan shrugged and shook his head. Common tactic for him. Always worked. He was crafty like that. Exactly, Atali agreed. And once I got there, I think everyone just made assumptions. Hiccup couldn't correct them if he didn't know the whole truth. No one on Burke knew Era, so they wouldn't have been able to put the pieces together. I didn't know what they were saying, let alone have the wherewithal to correct them. I was too focused on Era to care anyway. Minden and Nadia made the connection later on between Ethan's name and the timing. I told them what I knew, but I asked them not to say anything, that I didn't know the full story myself. So is that why Alvin left in the dead of winter? Astrid asked. After the burial. Atali nodded. I think Hiccup offered to let him stay until winter passed, but he insisted. Probably because there were too many painful memories there between losing Stoic and losing Era. I went with him to make sure Ethan was safe, to fly ahead and survey for sea ice and impassable areas, but once they were in sight of Outcast Island, I left. Ethan had too many emotions cycling through his mind to be able to fully process all of this. Guilt that he caused his mother to be so ill that it probably killed her. Grief, of losing his parents in ways that could have been so preventable. Anger that his father had made the decisions that he did instead of being clear with his intentions. Frustration that he never owned up to it even in the 17 years that followed. Jealousy that Atali had the chance to experience Era's motherly embrace in a way he never would. Confusion as to who actually knew what happened between his parents and who didn't. But the overwhelming sorrow that stayed consistent, underlying all of the other ones. Atali turned back to Ethan. Anyway, your father didn't leave with her because she never truly got better enough to survive the trip, and they didn't have proper healers on Outcast that could have helped her even if she did make it. Gothai was able to support Era through another 2 months almost, just shy of a full pregnancy. But you still came early. You were so weak. So pale. And so was she. Alvin was there, he had to hold you in your mother's arms because she couldn't hold you on her own. And your tiny cry, it was there but it was so small and quiet and strained. It brought us all to tears. Atali began crying again, looking Ethan up and down. The first time I saw you after all of that, grown and healthy and strong, I was so happy. You came so far. Your mother. Era. She developed a fever not long after you were born. She survived a few days, but, Atali opened her mouth to continue but had to pause before any words actually came out. Alvin was devastated. Era was fading beside him, and you were fading in his arms. I could tell he was trying to prepare himself to lose both of you, and he wasn't handling it well. He kept you close to her, as if he thought you both could give each other strength. She always kept one hand on you and one hand in Alvin's, through to the end. Atali wiped her eyes. Astrid held her hand and dried her cheeks as well. Ethan could feel his own tears pouring down his face but made no move to stop them. Zephyr gave him a gentle squeeze and laid her head on his shoulder, sniffling. She passed quietly. She didn't suffer. She whispered that she loved you and your father so much. She just fell asleep, and didn't wake up. Alvin knew. He knew the minute she fell asleep that last time that she wouldn't open her eyes again. She stopped breathing a few minutes later. He held on to you so tightly, Ethan. Like he was willing life into you so he wouldn't have to lose you too. And then you coughed, and my heart stopped. Alvin looked down at you, he looked so desperate, we thought you were about to pass as well. But then you let out this massive cry. Your cheeks got a bit pinker. Your arms and your legs tensed a bit stronger. And you got better and better with each passing day. Your father, he cried even harder and said your mother passed her hug to you. that she gave up her life so you could have yours. And so he named you after her. Hug. He knew that word. His father told him stories about that word, legends, beliefs. Hug was the spirit, the things within the soul that made a person who they were. Their personality, their essence. And Alvin believed Era lived on within Ethan. He'd said things like that before, and he'd explained Hug before. But he had never put the two together. Ethan never knew just how much of his mother he saw in Ethan. And hearing Era's story like this. Hearing his mother's story, the story that became his own. He was overwhelmed. He tried to think through it all, to slow down his thoughts and piece everything together, but he couldn't. He was numb. All of those emotions he felt earlier, the anger and guilt and jealousy and sorrow. He was sure they were still there, but as of now he couldn't find them. He was just numb. The room was silent. Ethan didn't notice. He didn't notice the time passing by. He didn't notice anyone looking at him. He barely noticed Zephyr's touch against his skin. Ethan? Astrid asked quietly. Are you all right? He was numb. I'm so sorry, Atali said. I'm sorry that I had to be the one to tell you all of this, that your father wasn't able to himself. But I hope that it will at least bring you some comfort, when you have time to process it all. And I know I wasn't there for you like I probably should have been in the past, but if you'll let me, I want to change that. If you need anything, I want you to feel that you can come to me. And I understand if you just can't feel that way right now, but I hope someday you will. Ethan just nodded. He was numb. Zephyr turned his head so he would look at her. He grounded himself in her touch. I need some time. Of course, Astrid said. That was a lot to take in. We'll let you turn in for the night. She stood and gestured for Atali to follow her. Atali took a long look at Ethan before stepping out of the door. Astrid stepped out after her before turning back inside. Zephyr. Zephyr searched Ethan's eyes like she had already so many times today. He didn't want her to leave. He wanted to beg her to stay. He didn't want to be alone right now, but he didn't want anyone else but her. No one else understood him like she did. Not anymore. Zephyr broke her gaze for a moment to look at her mother. I'll be home in a bit, okay? Astrid was quiet for a moment, but eventually Ethan heard her say, all right, take your time, and quietly shut the door. Ethan was numb. All he could manage to do was lay down on the bed. Zephyr laid down next to him without saying a word. She pulled herself up higher on the bed so she could pull Ethan into her chest. He let her. He needed it. He needed her. He began to cry softly. Zephyr brushed her fingers through his hair and held him close to her. I know, it's okay. I've got you. I've got you, I'm here, you're okay, she whispered over and over again. And then Ethan couldn't do it anymore. He missed his father. He longed for his mother. He ached for the life he used to have. He couldn't do it. He grieved for all of the losses he never let himself grieve over before, now that he was in the safety of Zephyr's arms. He sobbed. He sobbed so hard that it shook his body, Zephyr's body, the bed, the wall next to it. He soaked Zephyr's tunic with his tears. He latched his arms around her waist and held on to her like the last fraying lifeline in the middle of a hurricane. And he sobbed. And she just held him, reminding him that she was there and that he was okay and that it was okay to cry. She held him through the night and into the morning, until he eventually wept every bit of energy out of his body and sniffled off to sleep. Chapter 23, The Secrets Within. Notes. Hello my lovely readers. I have returned. Updates at the end, enjoy. Asterisk 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 TW, body mutilation, character death asterisk asterisk asterisk. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. 3 weeks earlier. As they stepped into the main thoroughfare of the northern markets, Gustav already didn't like what he saw. The stalls still looked as near bare as they had been on their last trip a month earlier, and even the people were few and far between, save the traders in their stalls. Gustav looked at Throg. I mean, I expected the markets to be a little sparse, but I thought they'd have restocked at least a little since last time. Throke nodded. It is a bit concerning, he muttered. That didn't make him feel any better. Let's just get what we need and get back home. Agreed. We will buy out whatever stock the merchants have if we must. But a long stay does not seem prudent. Ditto. All right, let's get this over with. As they continued down the line, they found more of the same, stalls bare of the essentials and sparse of anything else. They really do look just as empty as before, Gustav muttered. I feel we will not have much luck here, Throke agreed. What do you think is keeping all the stalls so bare? Throke thought for a moment. I wish I knew. He looked around warily before stepping closer to Gustav. Do not make it obvious who we are or where we hail from. The usual merchants will know us, but I am more concerned about newer faces who may be looking for us. Don't tell me Dager is getting in your head. He turned his head just in time to see two men talking discreetly while watching the two of them walk by. But, well, maybe we should stick with people we know anyway, just in case. Throke turned. He must have seen what Gustav saw as well. Agreed. Gustav saw at least one stall that showed some promise. All right, what's the absolute minimum we need? Throke thought for a moment. Furs and grains should suffice. Perhaps honey if we wish to avoid riots. Gustav gestured with his head. Trader Fenrir is over there. He's pretty reliably for honey and grains. I don't know about furs, but it's worth a shot. Throke nodded. We will get what we can from him and return to the ship where we can discuss further. Gustav nodded. Fine by me. As they approached Trader Fenrir, Gustav noticed Throke scanning the area. Gustav trusted Throke's eye better than his solely based on his lifetime's worth of experience, so Gustav took the lead. Trader Fenrir, how you doing? If it isn't the great Berserkus. Trader Fenrir boomed, his arms stretched out wide. Gustav internally flinched at the enthusiastic response to his question, and noticed Throke jump next to him as well. Aha, yes, thank you, Gustav nervously replied. Just out for a quick trip. Hey, you got any honey and grains? Furs, maybe. Oh, I've got plenty of honey and grains for you, always keep a good stock for you this late in the season. I was starting to worry I would lose out. You're much later than usual. Just got a little busy with the tribe. We'll take whatever you got. What about furs? Busy with the tribe, eh? That mysterious tribe you buy for, perhaps, home. Fenrir teased. You do always buy enough for 2 tribes late in the season, after all. For the last time, Fenrir, there's no mysterious tribe. You've been to our island, you know how they get. If we have a surplus, there's no need for infighting. Gustav paused for a moment. Well, less of a need, at least. Dager's done it for years and it hasn't failed us yet. Not to mention the fact that our tribe nearly doubled after we absorbed the defenders of the wing. Sure, Fenrir gathered up their wares of interest. Honey and grains I can provide, but I'm afraid I'm out of furs. Truly a shame, I fear it will be quite the cold winter. Gustav made an effort to avoid rolling his eyes. Oh yeah, why is that? We traders have our sources, Fenrir smiled. And your manipulative selling tactics, Gustav thought. I have plenty of wool that I can offer, however. Gustav stood his ground. He was very used to dealing with Fenrir after all these years. We have plenty of sheep that provide wool, Fenrir. What we don't have is furs. Any idea where we can get those? Since you don't have any. Suit yourself. Actually, I do know where you can find some. You may not recognize him, but his fur stores are quite impressive. Many beautiful furs from faraway lands as well. I believe he'll be able to fulfill your large desired quantities as well, and at a good price since he has so many. Gustav shared a look with Throke. It couldn't hurt. Throke shrugged. All right then, where is this new trader? Gustav asked Fenrir. Back at his ship, I presume. He mentioned he may depart within the day. I'd hurry if I were you. Which ship exactly? Fenrir scoffed. Trust me, you can't miss it. by far the biggest ship in the harbor, even more so than the massive vessel your own crew no doubt came in for all of your wares. Gustav's interest peaked. He had a hunch which ship Fenrir was talking about. It must be the one they saw docked in the harbor when they sailed into the northern markets. A grand and ornate ship towering above the rest of them, boasting 2 large masts and a stabilizer on its left side. Gustav couldn't remember seeing a ship like that since the dragon hunters tried to capture that Titan-winged Dromillion. Oh, I know which one you're talking about. What's this new trader's name? Boira. Nice enough fellow, I'm sure he'll be happy to help for the right price. Aren't you all? Gustav muttered under his breath. Thanks, Fenrir. If you don't mind packing up the grains and honey for us, we'll send some men back with our payment to pick it up. The usual price, I assume. We can offer some extra iron this trip, as a thanks for holding goods for us. Fenrir smiled. That'll do quite nicely, yes. Gustav turned to Throg. Shall we meet this new trader? Throg didn't seem thrilled, but he didn't argue either. They made their way back down the main throughway towards the ship. Throg walked up the gangplank to instruct the crew of what they were picking up and what to exchange it for. Gustav stayed on the dock and stared down the harbor at the massive ship. The more he took it in, the more curious he became. The design on the sails felt familiar to him, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Throg joined him once more and they set off towards the ship. Gustav's curiosity turned to uncertainty the closer they got. This does not look much like a trader's ship, Throg quietly remarked. Gustav sighed. I have to agree with you there, Throgster. And those sails. I know I recognize them but I can't figure out why. A tribal seal, perhaps. That's what I thought at first but I don't think that's it. It's... Ark, I know it's a monstrous nightmare obviously, I can't figure out why that specific design is so familiar. Gustav shook his head. Throg hesitated at the end of the mysterious ship's dock. Perhaps we can get by without. Hello, good sirs. A man stepped off the gangplank towards the end of the dock. Can I help you? You seem to be searching for something. Gustav looked at Throg, who had stiffened. Apologies, I didn't mean to startle you, the man said with raised hands and a small smile. I couldn't help but notice you both admiring our ship. My name is Jinna, and I'd be happy to help if we can. Have you come to this island in search of trades? Gustav tried to gauge Throg's response, but he remained stiff and stoic. We have, actually, yeah. We were looking for furs. Trader Fenrir suggested looking for, Boira, I think. Of course, that would be my captain. He is quite the well-known trapper. I'd be happy to introduce you to him, Jinna offered, stepping to the side and gesturing down the dock towards the gangplank. Gustav looked again at Throg, who was taking Jinna in carefully. Quite an interesting ship for a trader, Throg prodded. Jinna chuckled. I know, it's not exactly a trading ship. Like I said, my captain is not a trader, but a traveler and trapper. Though he does prefer to trade his own goods when he can, rather than always working through traders. Allows him to collect a larger profit while keeping prices fair. Throg nodded but said nothing. Gustav took that as his approval. Great, we'd love to take a look. We have iron to trade with, some silver and minimal gold. Will that work? We have quite a need for iron, so it absolutely will. Right this way, sir. Gustav. And this is Throg. Well then, right this way, sirs. Gustav and Throg. They cautiously followed Jinna onto the boat. They couldn't quite see the deck from the docks, nor could they see much of it from land, but Gustav assumed from the size of the ship alone there would be men all over it. But when they reached the top of the gangplank, they hardly saw anyone at all. Gustav shared a confused look with Throg. Suddenly Gustav wasn't so confident in this trade offer. You seem to be lacking in your crew. Have you had trouble finding suitable sailors? Throg prodded. Oh, not at all. They're all simply below deck preparing for a long journey. We plan to return to our homeland soon, Jinna explained nonchalantly. He gestured to a door at the bow of the ship, no doubt the captain's quarters. You'll find Captain Boira in his quarters here. I'm sure he will be delighted to hear of your interests. Jinnah smiled and waved before turning, walking across the deck and disappearing below. Gustav and Throke shared yet another curious look before Gustav slowly pushed the door open. The man sitting behind the captain's desk was startling to say the least. He had scars covering his body, most likely from head to toe, and more still healing wounds that disappeared deep into the collar of his tunic. His face was ghastly and torn up, and he appeared to be missing his left eye. But the part that struck Gustav as the most disturbing were the burns. Burns that he would recognize anywhere, even after all this time. Burns from the fire of a dragon's breath. The door closed behind them. "Gentlemen, how may I assist you?" The man's question was almost a sneer. Gustav's mind was racing. Jinnah said this man was a trapper, and he no doubt had the scars to match the profession. But the burns. Was he a dragon trapper at one point? "We're looking to trade for furs. Trader Fenrir sent us your way, do you know him?" "Ah, yes, Trader Fenrir. He was one of the first traders we spoke to when we arrived on this island. He is a very good man. We do have a great variety of furs. I trust Jinnah told you I was a trapper. Is he looking for dragons now? Is that why he's here?" Gustav tried to look closer at the burns without tipping off the trapper. "He did, yes. We're looking for quite a bit. We have a decent-sized tribe, but our island is a bit limited on large wildlife." "Well, lucky for you, we have a large supply. What can you offer in exchange?" The borders of the scars were very defined, too defined to be from a lava blast. Fire blast was possible, but they typically left behind welts and uneven heating within the skin, causing discoloration along the length of the scars. This man's scars were far too uniform, which led Gustav to believe it was more likely a near miss from a plasma or magnesium blast. The concentrated high heat would typically cause massive damage when hitting a target directly, but when grazing the target would quickly leave uniform burns across the surface. "Mostly iron. Would you have use for that?" Boira laughed and sarcastically remarked, "Would a trapper have use for iron?" He shook his head as he settled. "I think iron will suffice just fine." But that blast type combined with the age of the scars on his skin made Gustav's stomach drop. Those scars did not look like they were a decade old. They looked maybe months old, definitely not more than a few years. And there was only one place that still had dragons on the surface in the last 5 years. Great. Well, I believe my crewmate and I will head back to our ship to gather some iron. We will be back within the hour to make our trade. Nonsense, I would hate for you to make the extra trip without even seeing what I have to offer first. I wouldn't want to waste your time. Let me show you my stores before you go." "Oh, that's not necessary. Jinnah mentioned your crew was leaving soon. We would hate to delay you. We need to depart soon ourselves." Boira looked them over carefully before he shrugged and sat back in his chair. "Suit yourselves. We'll be waiting here for you." Gustav bowed his head. "Thank you." Throke pushed open the door to find Jinnah still standing outside. He bowed his head to the pair and smiled, letting them pass before entering the captain's quarters behind them and closing the door. Gustav took another look at the sails. He stared at the monstrous nightmare design glaring back at him. And then he broke out in a cold sweat. Drago. That's why he recognized the sails. They looked like the design of Drago's sails. Gustav wasted no time making his way across the deck and down the gangplank. Thankfully, Throke matched his urgency. Once they turned towards the berserker ship, Gustav asked, "Did you see those scars?" Throke nodded. "I did. You thinking what I'm thinking?" "The wing maidens," Throke said darkly. "Too many of those burns appeared to still be in the healing process for my liking." "Couldn't agree more." Gustav picked up the pace. "We have to get back to Warndager. We'll just make do with what we have." Suddenly, Throke nudged against Gustav's side and began to guide him away from the harbor. "What are you doing?" "They are following." Throke's voice was low and urgent. "Once we are in the covers of the trees, be prepared to run. Hopefully our knowledge of this island will allow us to lose them in the forest. They can't know which ship is ours if they don't already." Gustav trusted Throke's judgment, so he did what he was told without turning around and wasting time or tipping off their shadows. He kept his eyes on the trees and stuck close to Frog's side, waiting for his orders as they wove through the trading stalls of the market. How many? I believe 3. Frog began to pick up his pace as he pushed through the small groups of people that passed them. The one, Jinnah, he followed us off the ship immediately, but I saw 2 more looking over the deck. I'm sure they followed as well. Frog, those sails, I said I recognized them earlier, right? There is no time to discuss that now, Frog interrupted as they neared the tree line. Right now. Run. So he did. Gustav took off through the trees, splitting away from Frog when he began to run in a different direction. He heard a man shout behind them, yelling at the other 2 to follow him. Gustav wondered which him drew the short straw, but didn't want to risk a glance over his shoulder slowing him down to find out. He had his order. His order was to run. Unfortunately, this wasn't a large island, which meant if Gustav wanted to lose the goons, he would have to be smart about it. He would have to find some way to create enough distance between him and the persecutors that he could double back unnoticed and get back to the ship. He just hoped Frog had a similar plan. His lungs burned as his mind raced faster than his legs. These bastards were fast, he could hear their footfalls behind him. 2 pairs, to be exact. Damn it. Okay, he could do this, he just had to be extra smart about it. 2 goons, 2 brains, try to use them against each other. If they are dragon hunters, maybe they are just as useless as the originals from back in the days of Dragon's Edge. He began to weave around trees, pulling on loose bushes as he passed them to pull the brush into the pathways. He heard sticks cracking and leaves crunching behind him as the hunters crashed through them, but they didn't seem to slow down. He tried taking last-minute turns and unexpected jumps in front of trees to switch paths, but even the few times he heard the hunters behind him falter they quickly caught back up. Whoever these guys were, they were not the bumbling buffoons of the dragon hunters past. He needed a new tactic. He saw a small ridge cutting into the land to his right. He knew that ridge. It was a sharp drop to the forest below it, but it had plenty of roots sticking out the ground on the way down. It looked like a farther fall than it was from back here, and would definitely make someone pause if they didn't know about it. He started to curve towards the ridge. It was risky, the drop was still long enough that if he dropped and couldn't catch a sturdy root to slow his fall, he would definitely break a leg at the very least. Which meant he had to be careful where along the ridge he dropped, but he couldn't take too much time or else the hunters would catch on to what he was doing. And these hunters seemed like they wouldn't take long to figure out how to follow Gustav down the ridge if they watched him do it first. It had to be sudden, he was relying on the shock factor to make them pause and give Gustav enough time to pull away. An educated guess, then. He looked ahead along the ridge, searching for a large tree that would have large roots to match right along the edge of the drop-off. He found his target, calculated his launch point a few feet back from it, pushed his legs to run even faster, took a sharp turn towards the ridge's edge and leveled out along it just long enough to get the right angle, and jumped. What the fuck? Shit. He heard the shout behind him as the men skidded to a halt. Ha ha. It worked. But he hadn't timed his jump well enough, and flew directly over the large roots that were supposed to break up his fall. Without anything to swing on within his reach, his only option was to slow his fall as much as he could before he crashed into the ground. So he reached out desperately, grabbing onto anything and everything within reach. The smaller roots shredded the skin of his hands as he grasped them and then either pulled them from the dirt and rock or stripped them as he fell. He broke through the treetops below and tried to grab the branches, but was falling so fast he couldn't get a good grasp on them. So he braced his body for impact. When he came to, he found Throg standing over him. Praise the ancients, Throg sighed. What were you thinking? Gustav groaned. Yeah. Not my best plan. They heard a shout off in the trees. Throg looked towards the sound, fists clenched. Forgive me, Gustav Larsson, for this will surely be painful for you. What? Throg threw Gustav over his shoulder before he had a chance to finish his question. Gustav yelped as searing white pain shot down his back and right leg. Deep down somewhere he knew that the fact he could feel his body was a good thing, but right now he kind of wished he couldn't feel anything anyway. Still, with each step Throg took, Gustav felt closer to losing consciousness again. He tried to listen for the hunters following them, but he couldn't see or think or hear through the pain that continuously surged down his spine. But he definitely felt when Throke stuttered to a sudden halt. He blinked his bleary eyes, trying to determine why Throke stopped. It didn't take long for him to see one of the hunters staring at Throke's back. And judging by the smile plastered on the hunter's face, the other two must have them surrounded as well. "Put the boy down," one of them sneered. "I don't think I will," Throke replied. "I'm a man, asshole," Gustav spat. Though it didn't sound near as threatening as he intended through his weak, cracking voice. One of the other hunters chuckled. "Oh, this'll be too easy." Throke sighed. "Have it your way." He set Gustav on the ground as gently as he could, and Gustav bit his lip to try to hide the pain. Gustav fully trusted Throke's ability to handle himself in a fight. In fact, Throke was one of the best trainers on Berserker Island. He'd proven himself time and time again long before the defenders of the wing merged with the Berserkers. Gustav looked up to him, and had always hoped to be half the warrior Throke was. Which made things feel all the more bleak as Gustav could hear Throke slowly losing his ground. The pain was starting to wear Gustav down, and as much as he wanted to, he struggled to keep his eyes open. He found that while he could still feel most of his body, he couldn't move anything but his head, and that was so incredibly painful that he didn't want to risk it. So he lay helpless on the ground while Throke fought for both of their lives. He knew he saw Throke land some good hits, but it was 3 against 1. Once one of them managed to get the upper hand, it went downhill pretty quickly for Throke. The next time Gustav managed to open his eyes, they had Throke pinned and forced him to his knees. Some time passed, though Gustav wasn't sure how much, before Boira approached them. "Tell me, why did you feel the need to run?" he inquired sarcastically. "Innocent men never run." "You're right. Unless they are suspiciously followed." Gustav could hear the exhaustion in Throke's voice. Boira chuckled darkly and took a step closer. "I'll ask again, why did you feel the need to run? And I'll say again, your men followed us unprompted." "Oh, they were prompted. I ordered them to. You see, Sir Fenrir told me about you and your tribe, and as I understand it, you know about something that I want." "Yes, Iron." "You mentioned that," Throke said with a sarcastic air. Boira chuckled again. It was a sound that was growing increasingly grating to Gustav. "I admire your sense of humor in the face of danger. You must be a great warrior." He heard slow footsteps circling until Boira stepped into his field of view. He was seemingly taking in the forest around them. "You have information I want. And I will have it." "So you think?" "Oh, I will. I always find ways of getting what I want. I highly doubt I have any information that will be of use to you. Take our iron and leave us be." "I believe you do. You see, I was given some bad information by someone I had graciously brought into my ranks. Some very bad information. Not that dealing with that tribe of outcasts was very difficult, but it was such a waste of time, a waste of precious resources. And I don't appreciate that. So I took matters into my own hands." Throke and Gustav instantly shared withering looks as soon as the word outcasts passed Boira's lips. If Boira noticed, it didn't faze him. "And then I found Trader Fenrir. Now, he is a man of compelling tales. Tales of the days where dragons outnumbered men in this corner of the world. And one tribe who protected them all. Of course, I already knew about the dragons. That's why I came here in the first place, to join an old friend who unfortunately didn't live to see his dream unfold." Boira laughed. "Lucky for him. The dragons gave him a kinder end than I would have for sure. But this tribe. Now, that was new information that I learned upon entering these waters. Something that my initial confidant mentioned but apparently confused with this other tribe we conquered. But Fenrir had the stories to back his claims. And named your tribe specifically as the gatekeeper of this so-called long-lost tribe of dragon tamers. Which brings me to the information I will have from you. Tell me where the dragon tamers are. Tell me where the dragons are hiding." The pit in Gustav's stomach surely reached hell herself by now. He had no idea what to make of this man, but any friend of Drago's was an enemy to the archipelago and beyond. And his claims of conquering the tribe of outcasts taunted the back of his mind. He prayed to the gods it wasn't true. They had to get back to Berserker Island, to tell Dager what was no doubt coming for them, for New Berk, for the dragons. They had to tell Dager that the outcasts were in trouble. But they had to get away from Boira and his bloodhounds first. And most of all, they had to keep their mouths shut. Gustav met Throg's eyes. He saw nothing but resolve in them. He knew what they had to do, too. Throg looked Boira dead in his eyes. A challenge. Boira smiled a sickening sneer. So be it. He looked around for a moment before his eyes found what they were looking for. He gestured in that general direction with his head. Lay him out on that rock. The hunters sneered excitedly and dragged Throg out of Gustav's field of vision. Gustav couldn't turn his head around to see what exactly they did to Throg after that, but what he heard was enough to make his stomach churn. Boira simply said, "Crush it." And then he heard some sort of whooshing through the air, ending in the crackling of many breaking bones and Throg's cry of pain. Then Boira asked again, "Where are the dragons?" And Throg said nothing. Gustav's eyes stung with tears. He begged them not to fall. He refused to give these sick bastards that satisfaction. Gustav heard the distinct sound of iron against its sheath. "Where are the dragons?" Boira yelled. And Throg said nothing. A yell of exertion from Boira, iron slicing through soft skin, the hacking of a madman slowly having his way against a reluctant joint, the desperate cries of a man usually so stoic and strong. Gustav could feel the bile creeping up his throat. He swallowed it back down, but he couldn't hold back his tears any longer. He watched helplessly as Boira stepped back into view, spattered with blood and breathing in heavy sighs. They all sat in an eerie silence bathed in the whimpers of a broken man far too long for Gustav's sanity. And then Boira looked at Gustav. And he smiled. He turned back to Throg. "Perhaps you'll talk for him." Boira pulled a bow from behind his back, reached for an arrow with his free hand, and notched the end in place. He heard Throg's pleading nose repeated over and over again as Boira drew back. "Tell me where the dragons are hiding," he calmly ordered. And it was that calm order that sent a painful shiver down Gustav's broken spine. Because he realized in that moment that whether they told their secrets and lived, or shut up and let Boira kill them, Boira didn't care. He didn't care because either way he gets what he wants. He gets information, or he gets to enjoy the rush of the kill. And in that case, the least Gustav and Throg could do was buy the other's time. Gustav swallowed. "Don't say anything, Throg. Don't hurt him. Throg, don't give in. Let it happen. Gustav, don't be a hero. Then tell me where they are." Boira yelled. Gustav saw the hunger in his eyes as he stared down Throg. He thought he was close. He thought he was getting answers. "Let it happen," Gustav repeated with all the force he could muster. Boira's eyes flicked towards Gustav, but flicked back to Throg just as quickly. "Well. Don't say anything, don't say anything." Throg whimpered. Gustav heard him take a breath, and Gustav held his. But Throg only let out a quiet sob. Anger washed over Boira's face. "So be it," he spit through his teeth. And then he loosed the arrow. "I told you, I don't appreciate people who waste my time." Boira looked at his men. "Leave his legs. I want his master to know what's coming for him." Gustav heard a thud, and then the 4 hunters walked away. It was funny, Gustav hardly felt the arrow in his chest at all. "Throg," he called out. His throat felt wet. "Are you okay?" He heard leaves shifting underneath a heavy body. Slowly but surely, he listened as Throg dragged himself closer. Tears flowed down his face when he saw Throg's missing arm, now packed with dirt to minimize blood loss, and mutilated remaining hand. Throg chuckled darkly, voice strained as he tried to be strong for Gustav. "The man with an arrow in his chest asks if I'm okay. Your arm. It will heal, Gustav." Gustav felt so tired. Tears flowed from Throg's eyes. Gustav had never seen Throg cry before. Gustav smiled at Throg. "Tell it is I'm sorry." Throg opened his mouth, maybe to argue, but thought better of his words. He nodded instead. "I will. And Kara too." Throg nodded with a sad smile. Tell them I love them. Throke's eyes spilled more tears. They would be proud of what you've done. I swear to you I will protect them, care for them. Gustav smiled. They are in good hands, then. He coughed, spraying blood on the forest floor. Throke took a deep breath. I'm sorry I could not do the same for you. You did everything you could. We had to protect Hiccup. And the dragons. Fanghook, his eyes were growing heavy. You upheld your mission well. Throke laid his hand over Gustav's chest. Rest now, warrior. Close your eyes. Be with your wife and daughter one last time. It is. Kara. Gustav carried the last of the trading boxes onto the ship, working down his mental checklist to make sure they hadn't missed anything. When he was satisfied, he walked back down the gangplank and off the dock. It smiled at Gustav as he approached her. Gustav sighed, admiring the radiant beauty of his wife as the sun graced her skin and the wind danced through the few loose strands of hair framing her face. He hated leaving her, but there was business that had to be done. The young girl in Ediz's arms giggled and reached out her arms. Daddy. Gustav's heart melted, and he quickly closed the distance between him and his two favorite women. Ah, come here, baby girl. He scooped her up in his arms and held her tightly to his chest. She locked her arms around his neck and happily snuggled in. I love you so much, Kara. Kara giggled again. Love you, Daddy. Gustav held out an arm for Ediz. She wrapped an arm around his back as he pulled her into his side and rubbed Kara's back with her other arm. Gustav leaned over and kissed his wife. I'll be back in a few days. Daddy, do you has to go? Kara asked. I do, sweetheart, I'm sorry. But I'll be back soon, okay? He kissed her hair. And then you can go to work with me after I get back, how does that sound? Kara smiled. Okay, Daddy. Please be careful, Ediz said. I know the northern markets are better than they used to be, but I still worry. I know, I'll be careful. Always. He smiled to reassure her. Especially for you, my love. Ediz smiled. I know. Her smile faltered for just a moment before she composed herself with a small sigh. She held her arms out to Kara. Come here, sweetheart, Daddy has to go. Kara grew sad. Okay, Mama. She gave her father one more tight squeeze. Love you, Daddy. I love you so much, Kara. Gustav sighed. He kissed her head and set her on her feet. Turning to Ediz, he wrapped his arm tightly around her. I love you. I'll be back soon. I love you, too, Ediz sadly replied, and pulled back to give him a strong, passionate kiss. Gustav smiled as he reluctantly stepped back. He picked up his bag at Ediz's feet and waved to the loves of his life, walking away down the dock. Ediz scooped Kara up in her arms and they waved back. Gustav sighed as he stepped onto the boat. It was a routine trip, the same one they took every year for a final restock before winter truly set in. They'd be back in 2 days and the next boat would be prepared to take the portion of the new stock Hiccup would need to Newburgh. Heather would be making that trip, to give Gustav and Throke a break and to see Zephyr since she couldn't go to Zephyr's birthday. But routine or not, Gustav would miss his family. I'm so sorry, Ediz. Take care of our sweet Kara. I'll see you again in Valhalla. I love you both, more than you'll ever know. Notes. Chapter 24 is already written and will be posted in a few weeks, depending on how long the editing process takes. Chapter 25 is mostly written as well, so there will be no nearly 2-year wait for and update, lol my bad. Past that I will update more as I can, but due to a lot of personal things it has just been hard to write consistently. Please know that I have no intention of abandoning this fic though. It will be finished, and that I can promise. It just may take me some time. My Discord is still live if anyone would like to join that for more direct updates and some fun discussions. There is a great group of people on it currently. Thank you all so much for your support, it really means the world to me, and a massive thanks to my 2 awesome beaters for all the work they put into making this fic the best it can be. You guys are the best. Updates soon. Chapter 24, When a Tribe Dies. Notes. Hello my lovely readers. No trigger warnings this time, enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Astrid really did not want to have this conversation. Atali had been quite absent lately, and Hiccup and Astrid were starting to worry. Council was meeting nightly now thanks to all the changes and movement and chaos on the island, and Atali hadn't been at the last 3 meetings. At this rate she wouldn't be at the one tonight either if someone didn't drag her there, and her wing maidens reported not seeing her around either. Astrid could make a few guesses why. She took the long way to Atali's makeshift home so she could check in on Minden. No doubt Snotlout would be with her. Astrid hadn't seen him so happy in years, and seeing them together put a smile on her face. Which she would need walking into Atali's if she was going to make it through. As she walked into the healing hut, she noticed that things were much less hectic than they had been the past few months. Things were finally starting to settle, and the injured from all tribes seemed to have recovered. Thankfully, the casualties were minimal. She turned quickly to the room that had become Minden's residence and found her sitting in a chair next to her bed. She looked exhausted, but she had true color in her face for the first time since she arrived in Newburgh. She smiled up at Snotlout, who paused while brushing her hair long enough to lean over and kiss her. She giggled, making Snotlout smile bigger, and settled back with her eyes closed while he continued to brush. Astrid smiled. They looked so happy, maybe she'd come back later. Hey, Astrid. Snotlout said, smile never faltering. Did you need something? Minden opened her eyes and smiled at Astrid as well. Always a pleasure, Astrid. Astrid smiled and nodded in response. I was just wondering if either of you had seen Atali out and about lately. She's been scarce around the village. Minden sighed. I haven't. She hasn't been here to visit in a few weeks now, I'd say. I'm worried about her. She's taking all this a lot harder than the rest of us. Well, thanks for letting me know. I'm going to check on her now. I'll do whatever I can. Thank you, Astrid. Snotlout squeezed Minden's shoulder gently. Thanks for everything. I know I haven't been helping out much, but with Minden doing so much better I can start taking over so you can get some rest. Rest wasn't exactly what Astrid wanted right now. Rest made her restless, especially with all the changes and unknowns going on. I'll see you tonight. Snotlout asked. Yeah, I'll see you tonight, Astrid replied with a smile. I'm so glad you're doing better, Minden. Minden smiled and nodded as Astrid left the room, closing the door behind her. She sighed. If Atali hadn't even been out to visit Minden in weeks, this was about to be worse than she thought. As she left the healing hut, she came to a fork in the path. To the right was the village proper. To the left was a path that led into the forest and the training grounds. She sighed and banked right. Her fingers were itching to throw an axe. Her muscles ached to train. Her mind could still clearly see the movements of battle, but it begged to be able to carry them out. She felt so helpless, but she knew why she had to stand down. If she got hurt, she'd be upset with herself, sure. But if her child was hurt because of her decision, she'd never forgive herself. Even worse, this was the first time she found herself pregnant with the peace of their island threatened. It was the first time she actually feared she may be caught in combat while pregnant, more specifically. And regular combat with an oversized Viking was hard enough. She thought of the dreams she'd been having, of a crazed man twice her size attacking her with nothing but his hands. But even with her axe, she struggled to keep the upper hand. And while focused on protecting her severely swollen belly, the enemy overpowered her far too easily. She shivered. Gods, please don't let it come to that. Those words seemed to float through her head more and more each passing day. Suddenly a man stepped through the trees and onto the path, stopping her in her tracks. She gasped as he looked up at her, seeming just as surprised as she was. Oh, gods, he said, relaxing. He smiled apologetically at her, half bowing. Apologies, milady. Astrid sighed and placed her hand over her chest. Gods, Hiccup, don't scare me like that. I know, I'm sorry. He closed the distance between them and leaned in for a kiss, wrapping one arm around her back and resting his other hand on her belly. She happily leaned into him and returned the kiss, sliding her hand from her chest to his chest. It's all right, I'm just a little jumpy lately. Understandably. I think we all are. Are you headed to Atali's? Yeah, figured if I went a little early I might actually get her to the meeting later. Hiccup slipped his fingers in between hers. Well then allow me to escort you. You know, in case any more scary Vikings jump out at you. Astrid chuckled as they started back down the path. And where exactly did you materialize from? Hiccup chuckled as well. Yeah, I guess I kind of did. I was scoping out the land between the training grounds and Atali's current hut. Fishlegs and I have been surveying potential areas to build more homes in case either of the tribes stay. Astrid nodded. Does that seem like a good area? Yeah, actually, it's not bad. There's no major fissures, the land is pretty flat, it shouldn't be hard to build there. There's plenty of trees that we'll have to clear but it'll give us enough lumber to build with. And if the wing maidens settle there Atali wouldn't have to move if she didn't want to. That's good. If the outcasts stay, we might have to get a bit creative. But it shouldn't be hard. I'm just worried about putting all those weak elders too far from anyone else. I was worried about that too. We've already lost 4 since they arrived. They both quieted. Those 4 losses were hard on all of the outcasts, but Eason took them the hardest. It wasn't his fault of course, but he didn't see it that way. They each happened a few days apart, the oldest of the Vikings that came from Outcast Island finally showing the wear and tear the attack and then voyages had on them. Sickness overtook them, and at that point there wasn't anything anyone could do. Once the first one passed, the next 3 weren't far behind. Each death was only a few days out from the last. The final to perish, a woman named Nana, seemed to hit Eason the hardest. He stayed at her side until she passed, and then disappeared until the ship was ready. Eason, Osmond, Harver, and Oscar were the 4 that carried them each onto the ship, and the other 3 were the ones to light them, led by Osmond. Nana's ship, however, Eason insisted to light with them, shooting the lead arrow. And now knowing what had killed Alvin, it was suddenly very clear why it was so difficult for Eason to fire that first flaming arrow. Astrid thanked the gods Zephyr didn't hesitate to comfort him afterwards. Hiccup seemed to be thinking the same. I don't know how much more loss that poor kid can take. Astrid shook her head. I don't want to find out. Hiccup's voice hardened. Hopefully we won't have to. Hiccup was quiet for a moment, and then asked, how long has it been? Since the wing maidens arrived. Astrid thought. 4 weeks. Almost 5. Why? Hiccup sighed. It's getting late in the season. Hopefully Dager makes the supply trip out here soon. I'd hate for them to get stuck by sea ice. He shook his head. I hope they haven't run into any trouble. Astrid squeezed his hand. I'm sure they'll be here soon. They found themselves at the edge of the village, Atali's hut in sight. Astrid sighed. I'll see you at the meeting tonight. Hiccup leaned in for another kiss. Send for me if you need reinforcements. Astrid chuckled. I will. She kissed him, took a deep breath, and walked up to Atali's door. She knocked and waited a minute, but no one answered. She knocked again. Atali. It's Astrid. Still no answer. Atali. Astrid pushed on the door. The first thing she saw was a fire dying in the fireplace. As she pushed the door open and stepped inside, she got a good look at the absolute mess all over the main floor. And there was Atali, slumped over in her chair in front of the fire, half conscious and holding a pint of what Astrid assumed was ale. Oh boy. She was definitely going to need reinforcements. But Hiccup wasn't going to cut it. Astrid sighed to herself. Oh, tough nut, I hope you have some of that hangover fix left over from Zephyr's birthday. Things in Berk weren't what they used to be, and Zephyr could cut the tension on the island with an axe. Between the timeline of events on Outcast Island finally coming fully to light, pieced together by Eason's retelling along with some other brave souls who found their voice, and the explanation of Eason's parentage complete for the first time, New Berk was buzzing with gossip. And with gossip came opinions. But for once, Zephyr didn't care about the gossip and the opinions. All she could find herself focused on was Eason. He hadn't spoken much since the week before. Understandably so, Zephyr knew reliving the Battle of Outcast Island wasn't easy for him, and she still felt guilty pushing him to open up before he was ready. but then utterly telling him about his mother, information that no doubt he had been seeking for years. No one was anticipating that. No one could have prepared him for that. Especially not in the wake of losing his father. And then the first death in his tribe since they lost their island, so closely followed by 3 more. Yesterday was the first day he shot an arrow after what happened to his father. She knew he didn't want to do it, but he insisted. For Nana, he kept saying. I have to do this for Nana. But the pain in his face was still evident, and he dropped the